Okay, Dan, you're all set.
All right. Welcome, everyone. This is the Inland Wetlands Commission of New Canaan. This is Monday, June 20th. Can I call the meeting to order? Will the secretary take the roll, please?
Angela, your mic is muted. Angela, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Mr. Stepanek,
Here.
Ms. Jameson, present. Ms. Kirby? Here. Mr. Perkins?
Here.
Mr. Sillo?
Here.
Ms. Voike?
Absent.
Ms. Sanford?
Here.
Ms. Brunali?
Present.
Very good. Thank you.
Beth Sanford, would you become a regular member tonight, please?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of May 16th. You all have a copy of that? Any questions, any deletions, any comments? If not, can I hear a motion?
Peggy, I'll move to approve them.
Can I hear a second? George, you're gonna second it? George will second. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Approval of the site visit minutes of June 1st. You all have a copy of that? Any deletions, comments, or anything? If not,
Just
Can
that
I
I'm
hear a
going to
mo-
abstain because I didn't attend.
As will
Thank
I. I'll abstain.
we have two abstainings. All those, if there's no comments, can I hear a motion, please?
I'll move.
Who was that?
Beth Brunelli.
Beth,
Yes.
Beth. I'll second it. All those in favor? Aye. Applications to be received and if complete, scheduled for the regular meeting of July 18th. There are three here. Application number 212250, application 212251, and application 212252. And they are all applications by the New Canaan's Department of Public Works. I'd like to schedule a site visit now for these three applications. We have down here July 6th, but Kathleen, you think that may not be a good day now?
I throwing out the first available Wednesday was July 6th. I know it's the week of 4th of July, so folks might be traveling. If I can't get a quorum, we'll move it to a different Wednesday. So we could go to the following Wednesday, July 13th, but I thought I'd start with July 6th.
Who cannot make July 6th? Who cannot make it? George, Peggy, and Angela, right? Okay. So who can make it? Beth, I can. So it's 3 and 3. So we need, who we're missing?
I can make it.
Can you make it?
I'm back from vacation that week. Yep.
So it's 4 and 3. Okay. Let's have it. Okay, on the 6th. And Angela, I suspect that you'll go on your own.
That's correct. I can't do Tuesdays or Wednesdays.
And
I will go on my own, no problem.
okay, and George, what about you? Turn it, you gotta turn your mic on, George.
I will probably be at a clam bake in Maine. We're up there pretty much for the whole month of July, most of August.
All
We
right.
come back, but I'm not sure of the dates at this point. But I definitely will not be able to make either, I won't be able to make it on the 6th.
All right. So we'll schedule,
I'll
we'll
go
schedule it.
on my own.
Inland wet.
Dan.
Who's gonna go on their own?
Inland
I'll
Beth?
go on my own.
Wetland. What's it
Oh,
called?
Peggy,
Peggy.
okay, good.
Wetlands
Okay.
Commission meeting, and
Excuse me, Kathleen Holland
They're
here
gonna
for
be
the town of New
talking about
Canaan.
the
Someone has their mic on. They should not be
Hill
speaking. If
Street
you could
thing.
mute
They wanted
yourself.
people to-
I think it's Mary. We'll get rid of her. Okay, there we go. Thank you.
All right,
Okay.
let's start the
we-
regular meeting. Application number 212243 887 Wheat Street. Keith Simpson Associates.
We unmuted? Yes, sir. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We're here this evening to talk about 887 Weed Street and to really bring you up to date with the state of the property as it is now, and to request that the commission give consideration to some continued planting on it, which has been just held up because it was not quite clear under a prior permit how much filling and wetland encroachment had been permitted. So if I could just back up a little bit and give you a very brief history of it, really. The property was purchased in March 2018. It's just over 5 acres. It's next to Irwin Park, and I think, as you know, it's on the east side of Weed Street. Within 2 or 3 months, in May and June of 2018, the wetlands were delineated by Otto Thiel, and then that was immediately followed by a topographic survey with including location of the wetlands by RKW surveyors. Moving to the first site plan, which was approved by the commission. We don't. That's right. We want to go to the next one. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the first site plan was approved by the commission for the Laurel Rock Company, who made the application. And I just note that they made the application on a plan which was 1 inch equals 30 feet. It's not unusual, but later subsequent plans changed to 1 = 20 and 1 = 30 backwards and forward, which can be a little confusing sometimes. But anyway, that application, which was approved by the commission, asked for 20 evergreen trees, 18 to 20 feet high along Weed Street behind a stone wall. That area is really close to the wetlands along Weed Street, which the property in that part of the property was had pretty extensive wetlands there. That was one part of the application. The second component of the application was to plant 12 evergreen trees along the north side of the existing driveway, and that's the area which I think is of interest at the moment. The only note on the plans from Laurel Rock at that time, which was approved by the commission, it said that the installed trees will be backfilled with topsoil. Quote, that was what was written on the drawing. It didn't make any reference to the amount of fill which might be placed in wetlands there, the height at which that would be raised to, but it did give a limit of work area. So there was a horizontal limit of work area, but there really wasn't any vertical description of what might occur, other than the fact that the trees which were being installed would be backfilled with topsoil. But the limit of work area, when measured from the left-hand side of the driveway, so when you're driving into the property, the driveway has always been 12 feet wide. Since purchase of the property, the wall on the right-hand side is about 4 to 5 feet away from the driveway. All of that hasn't changed. It's very consistent. So the useful point of measurement is really the left-hand side of that driveway. And in the application which Laurel Rock prepared, they use that as a very visible on-site dimensional reference point, so to speak. So on their drawing, they said that there was a lawn 4 feet extending 4 feet off the edge of the driveway, and then they were asking for an additional 15 feet of planting area from the edge of the driveway, and then that extended up the driveway to about 28 feet away from the center of the culvert. That was the second component of what was approved by the commission then. And then the third one was the request for some deer fencing. We're hearing a lot of noise. Are you hearing that background noise? Is not coming from us. Do you know where that's coming from, Kathleen?
Good evening. This is Kathleen Holland from the town of New Canaan. If you're not muted, please mute yourself. We have a lot of background noise. We have a presentation going right now. Please mute your mics if you're not presenting.
But I put the wall up. Yeah.
If I can I continue?
Yes, you can,
Okay.
you can,
good. Thank you very much.
but you can always stop and we'll continue to ask people to mute their mics, okay?
Okay,
If it-
thanks so much. So that really describes, the plan that we have up there in front of you shows the planting which was approved by the commission along Weed Street. And that went in shortly thereafter. And then at the bottom of the driveway, the bottom of the plan rather, there's the driveway, and that's where 10 evergreen trees were approved to be planted in that area with some backfilling. So that was approved by the commission July 26, 2018. A few months later, in December of that year, 2018, the same applicant, Laurel Rock, with a plan which actually changed scale, which made it a little harder to follow. But anyway, they asked for permission from the commission to add additional planting along Weed Street. And that was, I think, considered very manageable by Kathleen, and I think approved administratively. And so that additional planting was also an approved activity. So now I'd just like to show you the two photographs of what planting occurred after those approvals, probably in late 2018 or early 2019. That's an aerial photograph looking down onto the driveway, and Weed Street is up along the top. And it shows these large hemlocks, probably 18 to 20 feet high, and there were 10 approved to be planted in that area. And then the next photograph shows from down at the driveway area. It shows the edge of the left-hand pavement as you go into the property, and then a lawn area, and then shows these large trees were planted. We weren't involved at that time at all, so I have no idea really how those trees were planted, except to say that the majority of them failed, unfortunately. I think one or two of them were able to be sort of rescued and used elsewhere on the property. But that planting plan didn't really.
I don't think that this is.
Stop. Tell them again, Kathleen, would you? To mute.
If your mic is not on mute and you're not presenting, please put your mic on mute. We're having interference from participants on this call. There's over 60 people on this call. Please mute your mic. If you're not speaking, I'll have to remove you from the meeting if it continues. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll just continue on briefly. So after that planning and that planting and so on, then the owner of the property did apply to you, the commission, via Frangio Engineering to put in a small pond on the property. That was all appropriately engineered, and it was appropriately approved by you in August of 2019. That work didn't actually occur until early this year, around March of this year, January, February, March of this year. It was at that time when I think Kathleen was visiting the property to do routine inspection of the ongoing pond work construction, that she noticed that there'd been a fair amount of filling in this area where these trees are now shown. So then I think we can move to our next pictures with, which shows that the hemlock trees have gone. And the driveway, as you can see, the left-hand side of the driveway is over on at the top of the picture there, which is a very good point of reference. And this amount of material out here, obviously a portion of it was lawn before, but these big hemlocks were in there, and because they had failed, then I think that the sense was from the contractors who were about to do some replacement planting in this area that the grade needed to be raised so that they wouldn't have a repeat of failed hemlocks. I would just say that I've worked around hemlocks for a long time, and they don't like to be planted down in wetland soil. They like to be near wetland soil, but they do not stand having their roots basically sort of underwater or heavily covered with water. So it would not have been a suitable planting to put them right down in the wetland. They do need some elevation to be planted well. So this is the amount of fill which get in. The applicant would now like to do some additional planting here. Just going back to that last picture for a moment, that's right. Right up ahead there on the other side of the stream, I think when you visit the site, you may well have noticed that there's planting there, which is the planting which the owner would like to be able to install, with your permission, on both sides of the driveway and also in this area which we're looking at right now. So yes, this shows you the character of the wetlands, which is adjacent to it. So I think you have every reason to assume that that was the nature of the wetlands, which was under the area, where there is now some fill. So then looking at it from down at the other end of the driveway, and the culvert is immediately below us, there is a section right ahead of us in the foreground there, where that fill extended further down and closer to the stream than was even originally permitted under the 2018 approval. So our application really now is to try to sort of get this back under control, if we could put it that way. I think one of the first things we need to do is to remove the material which is right up against the culvert and the stream channel here. It was never actually approved to be there, but it's we need to, I think, take that out and restore that area with some wetland planting, which we have listed, and I can just get to that quickly in a minute. But that's the first thing which we really want to do. And the next thing is along the right-hand side of all of that fill along there, we would basically cut back some of that fill and put in a boulder edge along there. I think there's always a concern among commissioners, which I sympathize with, where if an area of fill isn't clearly defined and delineated and sort of established, it has a tendency to sort of keep on creeping and getting bigger at the expense of the wetland. So it's my recommendation of that area not only be removed and cut back a certain amount, not all of this material, but certainly that outer edge of it, and then it be stabilized with boulders, and then there'll be a very clear definition for that. And also that will be something which can be surveyed in, and so the commission will know exactly what it approved in the past. And any future applications can make reference back to that. So we install that boulder edge, and then we'd add wetland planting wherever we had done a removal. This is the plan which we have before you. We're showing inkberry and some viburnum and some switchgrass and so on, but they're appropriate wetland plants. I would add one, I think, important point is that when you had the application before you for the creation of the pond and the stream system and so on, there was a lot of Japanese knotweed on the property, which is particularly invasive and particularly difficult to cope with. And as a part of that last application, that was to be removed from the property. And I can't tell you, I'm very, very glad to see that did in fact happen. So I do believe that the owners of the property want to respond responsibly to things such as invasive plant species, of which Japanese knotweed is one of the worst. So I think all the planting that we are proposing within the wetland, I think is very familiar kind of planting for you. The owners would like to do some upland planting along the driveway. They would like to install the horn beams, 16 horn beams, 8 on either side of the driveway, and then a hedge down at the top of the slope, which we would now create where the boulders are. And the hedge would be consisting of azaleas and Japanese holly and so on. And then the rest of it from the driveway out to that hedge would be lawn. So that's the nature of the request at this point. I think it does give the commission and the owners and everyone involved, I think, a chance to know exactly what is being approved in this case, we hope approved. And so that it'll be something which will be surveyable and identifiable in the future. I think it will tend to, with this formula, will tend to prevent any future encroachment further northward towards the wetland by any owner at any time. So if I may, Mr. Chairman, that's the substance of what. Obviously, I'm very happy to answer any questions that you or any commissioners may have.
I have a couple of questions. This is Peggy Kirby. I'm just wondering how much fill was actually brought in on that piece of property to that area? Do you know?
I don't know exactly how much came in recently. My understanding was that was what was there, but it had just been basically sort of had the vegetation taken off the top of it and was prepared for planting. We were told that there had been no additional fill brought in since those hemlocks were planted.
So that fill was brought in for the hemlock trees when they were planted.
I'm sorry, that's I didn't calculate.
Was that fill brought in for the hemlock trees when they were planted?
Yeah, yes, we were informed by the landscape contractors that fill was, that's where the hemlock trees were planted originally, yes.
And was that fill originally okayed with the permit, or were they just going to be planted the way that on the property as it existed at the time?
Well, the original permit was actually silent on the amount of fill or the height of the fill. There wasn't a cross section, which we now have actually. We've got a couple of drawings which show what we're proposing and suggesting, but I can't tell, frankly, because I don't know, and I wasn't a part of any of that filling which took place, or the timing of it.
And how much of the wetlands were filled with that?
Well, going back to this survey, if we could, which is right at the beginning, can show you where this drawing is a little hard to read, but this shows you the area where the wetlands were originally. So when the property was purchased in 2018, this survey was done at that time, and the wetland delineation was done at that time. So the wetlands were not exactly parallel to the driveway, but at the
Close to it, though.
Eastern end of it, you can see it's like 2 or 3 feet away from the edge, and then at the other end of it, it's like 7 to 8 feet away from it.
So it certainly covered the upland area then.
Yes, there was some upland area there, but certainly this fill is in wetland. There's no question about it. A lot of it is, yeah.
So this is Angela Jameson. I have a question for Ms. Holland. Could you perhaps elaborate on exactly what was approved, and then what was, if you did a site visit after an inspection after the original planting of the hemlock, what you observed there?
Sure. So I added in the staff report, the attached to your memo was the permit that had been issued by the commission. 1718-50 was the actual permit number. It is attached in your documents. That, as Keith was trying to explain, that was done by a different landscaping company. The plans were rather vague, but the plans did include, I've forgotten how many hemlocks planted adjacent to the northern side of the driveway. They were more or less planted literally in mounds. They were very large hemlocks, by the way. I was a little distracted during Keith's presentation, so I apologize. I may be repeating some of the things that he's already said, but they were fairly large trees. The hemlocks had very large root balls, so the root balls were kind of placed on top of the ground with some fill placed around that area. That is what the commission had approved. There also was an existing approximately 7 feet of shoulder that had already been shown on a plan along that portion of the driveway. And then the hemlocks were planted behind that. So after the hemlocks were planted, I forget the timing of it, but they were closed out. The permit was closed out upon the planting. Everything was existing and was done in accordance with the permit that was issued by the commission back in 1718. Going forward, I'd say winter of last year, the contractor for the pond started the pond activities that you guys had approved a permit for, the pond, the creation of the pond in the front yard there. Hutchinson Tree Company was brought on board to now care for the trees on the property. The hemlocks that had been planted in 1718 were not doing well. As Keith said, they don't really like to be put into wet areas. And according to what I was told, the planting wasn't done in the best manner, so that the hemlocks were not surviving. So at that time, they had asked just to save what they could, and they moved approximately, I think it was 5 or 6 trees to upland areas, and then they got rid of the rest. So as I'm going out there but then there was no conversation after that. I think that's where the miscommunication or misunderstanding occurred. They then thought they could go back in and now establish the hemlocks or a planting scheme that would actually be successful for that area. That's when obviously I noticed the what appeared to be a freshly graded and filled area that you're seeing now on the photos, and asked them to stop, which they did stop the activity, and come back to the commission to get it fully vetted and reviewed, frankly, again, to hopefully have a successful planting plan. That's when Keith Simpson was engaged by the owner to try to mitigate the situation, because there was definitely, in my opinion, some fill appeared to have been added to this area that was beyond what the commission had approved on a previous scheme or planting of this area. So Keith is back with a plan that hopefully tries to closely represent what had previously been approved with actually a correct method of planting. Keith's plan does incorporate the removal of 4 to 5 feet of the fill, pulling that slope back, in addition to establishing a boulder demarcation wall to again limit and demarcate, where the planting is allowed to be established and where the wetlands should remain. In addition, he has some mitigation plantings on the lower portion of the slope where the fill will be removed.
Well,
So,
thank you for that, Ms. Holland. So, Mr. Simpson, I have a question for you now. Why not just remove all that fill? You've shown us photos of what a good-looking wetland we have here. It's part of a large wetland corridor that runs down both sides of Weed Street. Why not remove the fill that is there and restore the wetlands to how they were, and to the extent that there are going to be new plantings, come up with something that is appropriate and thrives in a wetland habitat?
Well, I understand the question, and I think that there's a legitimate desire to have a reasonable shoulder along the driveway. The vertical distance between the probably, well, I think we can tell from what the original survey showed, with the elevation of the wetland versus the elevation of the driveway is considerably higher. So I think the driveway has about a good 5 feet of distance on the right-hand side before it gets to the wall. But on the left-hand side, I would think that it would really be very fair and reasonable to expect that it would really need a similar shoulder of, say, certainly 5 to 6 feet, if not a little more, to be able to maintain the integrity of the driveway, and meaning its structural integrity as well as practical but the distance beyond that into the wetland, I don't think needs to be as wide as it currently is, and it's whether it was actually approved as filling of that wetland at that time is really, it's hard to decipher from the permits which took place back then.
Well, I think you raise an interesting point for us all to ponder on, and just a general note I'd make. It kind of behooves the Inland Wetlands Commission, when we're approving permits, to be very, very specific about the amount of fill we're permitting, both in terms of horizontally and vertically. But certainly, I think that's an interesting idea to perhaps rein in the width of the area that will be filled for and used for plantings and used to maintain the structural integrity of the driveway.
I also add that I think, removing 4 to 5 feet, that seems like a tiny amount relative to the amount of fill that seems to have been put in there.
If I can interject too, I mean, I do agree with Mr. Simpson saying that the integrity of the driveway will be upheld by the fill that is brought in, because it drops down, it holds the integrity of the sides of the driveway, which will, reduce the amount of construction, 5, 7, 8 years down the road, where they're going to have to do a new driveway and disturb more. So, that might be something to think about.
Well, I think we do need to protect the driveway, and I know the commission over the years has been very understanding about the importance of having structurally sound driveways, even when they're close to wetlands, and we're really capable of doing that. But it's just I think it's the extent of the distance beyond the driveway pavement which this fill went out into, which is what caused Kathleen Holland to notice this and be concerned that maybe it was more than had been originally approved under the permit. So
Yeah, we also said that we're going to rein it in a little bit, correct?
Yes, I think there's an understanding that that it really isn't essential for it to go that far out. And I think it really is appropriate to find out what the commission's comfort level is in terms of how much horizontally the driveway shoulder should be able to extend sort of into the wetland. Vertically, I think it's about 3 feet, basically, the whole way out. So I think the wetlands were probably 3 feet down underneath what's shown right now.
I have one other question. Is there any reason you're not putting the hemlocks back in now that the fill is there and it's the soil is a little different?
I guess the hemlocks would certainly be likely to do better if they were in this higher soil. They love to send their roots down into wetlands, but they don't like to sit in wet soil. I think that the owners have sort of moved on from feeling that they need to have an evergreen screen to prevent them being able to see into the wetlands. Personally, I enjoy being able to see into wetlands. And I think that their change of planting wise to a hedge rather than tall hemlock trees actually is welcome. I can understand the hemlock trees along Weed Street, which is a public highway, but in their own driveway, actually, I welcome the choice of a lower hedge like Delaware Valley azaleas rather than very tall hemlocks, which would preclude any view into the wetlands. That's just a personal response, though. Kathleen has a comment, I think.
Dan, Kathleen, for the record, I just wanted to add, I think I recollect the 2017 permit that was issued. There was already an established 7-foot shoulder on the driveway. And then maybe Keith could opine on what root ball would be equivalent to a hemlock in order to try to get close to that area of disturbance that had previously been approved from the commission. Because that 7 feet sticks in my mind that it had already been there. Even the hemlocks, what I'm trying to say, the hemlocks were planted beyond the 7 feet of a
Yes.
shoulder that was already there.
Right.
So if there was a thought to, make sure that the structural integrity of the driveway is maintained, I think that's important. And secondly, to try to more closely match what had previously been approved by the commission under a wetlands permit. However, unfortunately, the hemlocks failed. You had disturbance that was the 7 feet plus whatever the root ball of a probably 18-foot hemlock would be, just to give you a point of reference of what number you might be looking for that might be reasonable to get more closely back to. If you're not satisfied with the 4 or 5 feet, I think that's what Keith is averaging to remove. Maybe something more appropriate to allow, let's say if it was 7 and maybe 10 feet to allow something to that regard.
So this is Angela Jameson. I'm just asking myself, with the benefit of hindsight, which is always great to have, whether 7 feet was the best extent to come up with, in that 2018 permit. You learn as you go along, and of course it's important to have structural integrity for the driveway. But if 4 to 5 feet would provide that structural integrity, why not go with that? We're not bound by what was decided in 2018. This is a very different application, and I think we should look at this new application from all angles and decide it on its merit, and not feel that we are bound by whatever was agreed in 2018.
If I could just follow up with a comment on that, particularly relating to the hemlocks and what Kathleen said. If the shoulder on the driveway is only 7 feet or even 10 feet and so on, I think hemlock is a really inappropriate plant for that, because any evergreen tree is going to spread and interfere with the driveway. So I can understand that in the past, where the request was for hemlocks, they were a lot further away from the driveway. Now the request is for deciduous trees, which are much better able to handle a location like that. And in this particular case, the hornbeams are actually fastigiate trees, so they will not be the wide spreaders. So they don't need as much horizontal space as the hemlocks did. But I think it's a matter of how much in that direction away from the driveway the commission is comfortable with. And there was as Kathleen pointed out, there was a 7-foot wide grass area from the edge of the driveway until you got to the, which was approved, until you got to any planting area. So, I mean, I think in the 3 feet beyond the 7 feet, so if you went out to 10 or 11 feet, you could get some really appropriate planting, which held the driveway in place. And on the cross section that we have, which we're showing, is we have the pavement of the driveway clearly shown there. And I think it's just a question of, my guess is that under 50% of what you're looking at between the edge of the pavement and where the where the wetland edge is shown, I think that was originally wetland. I don't doubt that. It was varying in width. So I think I understand the sentiment to reconsider what was approved previously, because it was not really as specific as I think any of us would like it to have been at this point. So I think it's a matter of what you feel comfortable with at this time. I have tried to sort of present a reasonable, I think, picture, but definitely I'm trying to limit any future migration of disturbance to the wetlands north of this driveway. That's definitely a part of the goal.
So Keith, this is Angela Jameson again. To help us, can you perhaps just describe how many feet these various sections are on the diagram that we're looking at? So, we've got the driveway itself, and then there is, obviously a border here. Perhaps you could just, walk us through how many feet we're talking about, so that it's very clear. I know you've got markings on here, but it would be helpful if you could just talk us through.
Sure. Okay. Well, even starting out on the far right-hand side, that's where the wall is. And then there's the shoulder from the wall to the edge of the existing driveway, which is about 5 feet. It varies a little bit. Then there's the 12-foot width of the driveway, which is very clear. And then there's the approximate, that's the approximate proposed grade. That's what that sign shows. But that dashed line underneath, it shows that's where the grade is sort of right now, as it slopes down towards the wetland. And we're suggesting that we cut all of the grade back in that last 5 to 6 feet, and instead insert boulders along there so there won't be any further encroachment. So we have a total in here. I'm trying to remember exactly what the number was. But it's I think it's around 11 feet there. Yeah, which one? Oh, I'm just looking for it. I have my own notes here. Yes, a lawn edge of around, going back to the lawn edge of 7 feet. I think that's a reasonable distance of lawn, and that's really been there sort of all along. And then it's a question of how much goes beyond that lawn edge. And we've got about another 7 feet there in which to do this hedge planting before we get to that boulder. So it's less than you were originally approved, but it's not obviously a wholesale removal of everything out of the wetland. That's for sure. Well, I think the measurement really should be from that edge of driveway, which is this is the left-hand edge of driveway. That's the critical distance, I think, which the commission hopefully will get some level of comfort with, and then we can establish the outer edge of it with the boulders. That's really our goal.
Keith, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Mr. Stepanek.
When we were out there for the site visit, we were out there for about a half hour. And during that time, 2 cars, one came in from Wheat Street, the other came in, they were both heading out, one was heading in, one was heading out. And then that meant that one had to back out, one backed out in Wheat Street, and the other one backed into the driveway. Is is there any way of eliminating that? You know, it's a long driveway. Would it make any sense to, can you drive on the shoulder? I guess that's what I'm asking. Can you drive on the shoulder to eliminate the backing out of the driveway or the backing up on the driveway?
Well, I understand the question completely, and because we were there at the same time, the commissioners ourselves were there at the same time, and indeed, even at that early hour of the morning, there were cars coming in and there were cars going out, and so I think clearly the south side of the driveway over where the wall is, there's really no room there, especially if you plant in there. There's no room there for passing. But normally with a 12-foot wide driveway, you can pull over onto a shoulder if that's grass. And it was previously 7 feet of grass there.
Right.
I think that if I lived in the property, I would value that 7 feet of shoulder as a place where, yes, if it was necessary at any point for someone to be able to pass each other, they could do that. So I take your point, and it was very tight. I agree. It's just a long driveway, and the culvert is exactly the 12-foot width. So there's no widening that out, and that's for sure.
Yeah.
So I understand the sentiment. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Mr. Simpson, this is Commissioner Bernelli.
Yes.
If this new plan was approved, would any portion of the new demarcation wall exceed the width that was approved in the prior permit?
No, we wouldn't, because we are reducing the amount, which no, we are. I'm sorry. The answer is no, it would not. We are reducing the amount over what was approved previously.
And
I thought it was me.
a second question, was part of the decision to move away from hemlocks related to a lot of hemlocks in Connecticut not doing well? I believe it's due to an insect. I could be wrong about this.
Well, we do know that hemlocks are somewhat disease prone, and they're actually a high maintenance plant as a result. I think the decision to move away from the hemlocks was because they had simply failed, in my view, sort of because of the manner in which they had been planted in the first place. So I think they suffered from the double threat of having normal problems that hemlocks have, plus being inadequately planted. I think they really need to be planted well. If these were 18 to 20 foot high hemlocks, they needed to be planted extremely well to survive. That's a big tree, I think. I don't think it was a wise choice in the first place, quite frankly. So we tried to move on from that too.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
All right, any other questions? Any other comments?
Well, I would really like us to consider, scaling this back a bit and coming up with some guidelines that would be helpful to the property owner and to Mr. Simpson as the landscaper here. I mean, it sounds as though there was 7 feet to the lawn edge that was there all the time. But really, does there need to be another 7 feet for the hedge before the line of boulders? Couldn't that be, brought in somewhat?
Is this these are comments for the chairman, I think, rather than a question for me, I'm assuming.
Well, I would be happy to hear, comments from you and from other commission members too.
All right. Well, it could be less. There's no question about it. It could be less. I mean, I think 7 feet seems to be vital for good functioning of the driveway, but how much beyond that for a planting area for hedge, I don't know that it needs to necessarily be another 7 feet.
Well, I mean, we want to be reasonable when it comes to the driveway. We want to make sure that the structural integrity of the driveway can be maintained, that vehicles can, pass and maneuver safely. Those are all important points. But I, really am beginning to wonder about the basis for what we approved back in 2018. I mean, these are well-functioning wetlands, which are getting rarer and rarer. They easily turn into non-wetlands with development. I think it would be great to try and preserve that wetland corridor as best we can along Weed Street. And I'd like to propose that we allow the 7 foot from the driveway that was always the lawn edge, and then maybe another 4 or 5 feet thereafter for plantings.
Angela, I was actually going to suggest the same thing. Maybe we can come to a compromise where instead of the 7, maybe 3.5 feet, 4 feet, so they can plant what they need to plant. I think that's a great idea.
Well, I could certainly go along with that, Anthony, 3.5 to 4 feet.
I would agree. I think it's a good compromise from considering where it has been and where it is now. I think that it's fair, and it also gets Keith to do the right thing in that area.
Can I just, it's Peggy Kirby. Keith, I just have a question of you. Is that enough space for the plantings that you're proposing to grow, or do you need more than that?
Well, I think it could be accommodated within that area, I think it could be accommodated within that area. Yeah.
Could be, yeah.
So just to clarify, is the thinking it would be the 7 foot existing lawn would remain that area, plus I think 3.5 feet, and then the boulders would be at beyond the 3.5 foot mark. Is that correct?
Right.
I'd be more inclined to do 4 to give that little bit of extra,
It would be easier number. Which
well,
then
we could make it 3. That's a nice round number too.
I hate to penalize them too much. He's designed this nice.
Yeah.
And if they have to really use that lawn to get 2 cars in and out, the lawn's going to take a bit of a beating, and I don't know. I think that I don't see that the half foot extra makes that significant a difference, but that's just me.
I think that I also agree. I think considering that Keith has, really thought this over and tried, put his best foot forward on this, I think maybe we should accommodate the extra half a foot. Considering he has come up with a plan that will work with certain things that will work with certain things.
Keith, what do you think the applicant would say on reducing that?
Well, I think he is really wishing for a good wide entrance, into the property there. But of course, it's all wetland to the north, and so I think it'd be disappointed. But I think the applicant realizes that there has to be a limitation on the migration towards the wetland, and so I think his understanding about a firm edge being established at this time. But I can't say more from what the applicant might feel.
Yeah. So you don't see any negatives to this. I just want to make sure I understand. You don't see any negatives to reducing the width. Is that right?
Well, I think that it's clearly less less planting area and less, it's the same amount of lawn area, the 7 feet, but the planting area, they have in mind a double hedge up there along that edge. And so I think they just wanted to see it be as spacious as possible, but it is all of that area where the hedge is on former wetland. And you are the commission, and so I have to respect and fully respect your concern towards any wetland encroachment.
Angela, you want to make a motion? Or you want to, Angela? Where are you? I can't see you.
Sure. Does anybody else, but can I just ask another question of fellow commission members? Does anybody else but me think that it would be better to keep this to a 3.5 foot area for the plantings?
As opposed to 4, or
Yes,
opposed to 7?
as opposed to 4. I think personally that 3.5 is fairly generous, given that we're talking about planting in the wetlands.
What do you think, Anthony?
Again, I mean, I think that I don't think that these guys did like a fly-by-night thing. I think that they really planned it out. I think that I wasn't on the commission in 17-18, but I will say that it seems like they got something approved. It didn't work, right? So then they tried to alter. They're using Keith to come up with a better plan.
Yeah.
I feel like the 1/2 foot. I mean, I do understand Angela's point where it's encroaching in the wetlands again. And to Keith's point, I think he was, very honest with the fact on what was going on and how it was going on. So, not to undermine Angela, and I don't mean to, Angela, but I feel like maybe like the 1/2 foot it is, an accommodation that, I can respect, because we are cutting it back already. I do understand Angela's point though. So, I mean, I guess it's up to the rest of the commission members as well.
Kathy, do you have any comments?
No, I think I tried to express before, there already was a 7-foot shelf, if you will, that existed even before the previous application came before the commission, which then allowed 18 to 20 foot large hemlocks planted beyond that. So guesstimating how large that disturbance would be, it's probably roughly in that neighborhood of 4 to 5 feet. So there had been a previous filling of the wetlands allowed with the hemlock planting. And I think the commission has to decide what you're comfortable with. I do like the concept of providing a boulder demarcation along that edge. I know the commission is aware that this particular applicant has just recently undertaken a very large pond restoration or pond creation on the property. So I don't think there's a deliberate, discontent of the wetlands. I believe they are embracing the property for what is currently on the property, and actually have enhanced it to a large degree in other areas with, frankly, a more functioning wetlands with the recent pond creation. So to the extent you can maybe think about that as well. There's a large significant wetlands still on this property. The driveway had existed in this location for I don't know how long when the house was actually created. So it was a bit of an existing condition that now we're trying to get corrected with something that's going to work and function properly. And if you're uncomfortable with the amount of filling, then that's where the commission has to decide how much seems reasonable for this location, taking the entire site into consideration.
Well, I personally, I would go with the 4 feet, quite frankly. If the applicant is expecting 7, and Keith is requesting 7 or requesting, then I would go at 4. Or leave it the way it is. So anyone would want to go with 4. I guess we have to raise our hands. I don't see everybody, but Dan, we go at 4. Angela, you're 3.5. Beth?
4.
4.
4 for this Beth too.
Who else? Anthony, you said
Anthony,
4.
I'll go with 4. Yep.
Yeah.
Peggy.
I'll go,
Peggy?
I'll go
Yeah.
with 4 as well.
So I'm sorry, I'm clearly in the minority here, and you know, I'm not going to keep on arguing over 6
Okay.
issues.
Yeah, okay. Can I hear a motion to reduce it from 7 to 4? Yeah,
Well, I'll go ahead and propose that we approve, subject to that that area for plantings being reduced from 7 foot to 4 foot, and with the 7 foot shoulder that was lawn previously. I hope I have expressed that correctly.
all those in favor? Raise your hand. Anyone that's against it? Any? Except, and Angela, you're gonna vote for it too, so
Yeah, I proposed it.
we'll go with 4 then.
Mr. Chairman, just before you conclude your final vote, I did have 2 possible special conditions, and I can read them if you haven't finalized your vote yet. I think because this needs some oversight, our oversight should be provided by the landscape architect of all construction and planting, since we're changing a little bit of what had been actually drafted by the landscape architect. I think that's an important special consideration for the commission. In addition, because there's a decent amount of landscaping that will be provided for this location, and in the light that we had unsuccessful planting with the previous group, completely different group, that I believe the landscape architect shall provide a final report and an as-built condition survey to the inland wetland staff upon completion. So I would ask that you consider those special conditions.
I like them, they're good.
Dan,
Yeah,
we had been talking about after the 4 feet to have the
Yeah.
demarcation wall. I don't believe that was in the proposal that we were voting on.
I'm very happy to amend that proposal to include that boulder demarcation after the 4 foot area that we are permitting for planting.
Now, this is George Perkins. Angela, could you restate the motion for us?
Okay, and please, anyone
Because, you know,
chime in afterwards.
We've gone
I
here
don't
and
get
there,
this.
so let's see if we can get it down.
Chime
to-
in if I don't get it completely right. So what we are approving is a 7 foot area beyond the driveway, which had previously been lawn, to provide a shoulder area for that driveway. Then a 4 foot wide area for plantings, and then a line of boulders to be placed to demarcate the edge of the plantings from the pristine wetlands.
And with 2 special conditions.
And with 2 special conditions. Thank you very much.
I'll
So
second
oversight
that.
by the landscape architect, and then a final report to staff once the plantings have happened, to include, I think Kathleen said, some comments on the condition of the asphalt.
Second,
Did I manage it that time?
You did.
I think
Nicely
so.
done.
Very,
that's
very
that's good, thank you. All those in favor, raise your hands. All those opposed? Motion's carried, thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
All right, now we moving along. Before we discuss item number 11 and 12 on the agenda. I would like to read an opening statement before we get into it. So my opening statement is this. The next two items on the agenda both involve property at 17 and 23 Hill Street. The first is a referral to the commission as a result of a notice of violation that has been issued. In this matter, a verified petition to intervene has been filed under Connecticut General Statutes 22A-19. That means that the petitioners have alleged that the proceeding involves unreasonable pollution to the natural resources of the state of Connecticut, As such, the petitioners will be permitted to address the commission about those allegations. The second matter involves a petition to the Wetlands Commission seeking a revocation of wetland permit number 17-18-53. Wetland permit 17-18-53 involved an application to construct a driveway at the subject property. The driveway involved a wetland crossing and so required approval from the commission. The petitioners have claimed that the permit was obtained as a result of false statements made by the applicant to the commission that the commission relied upon in approving the application. The petitioners have provided the commission with videotapes of our February 27, 2017 and October 15, 2018 meetings, in which Mr. Karp stated in unequivocal terms that the purpose of the driveway crossing was to serve two single-family houses. At our February 27, 2017 meeting, he went so far as to say that the driveway, quote, doesn't allow for any more development than 2 lots, end of quote. At our October 15, 2018 meeting, he stated that the impact of the wetlands from a driveway serving 2 lots needed to be distinguished from a road that served 130 trips per day. Obviously, Mr. Karp is entitled to change his mind as to the use of his property. Additionally, in my opinion at least, it's not possible for us as a commission to get into Mr. Karp's head from 4 years ago and make judgments about his intent in 2017 and 2018. Also, when we review an application, we are required to look at impacts from the specific activity that is located in a regulated area or is likely to have a significant impact on the wetlands. So far, subject to compliance with the notice of violation, the work is consistent with the driveway that can serve 2 houses. However, and this is very important, it is clear that if Mr. Karp decides to seek approval to develop this property with a multi-family unit or units, or in any manner that is more intense than 2 single-family houses, he must return to this commission for review and approval. To the extent a new permit may be required, it will supersede the existing permit, making revocation of the existing permit irrelevant. With that, we will hear from Kathleen Holland on the first item, the notice of violation. Okay, end of statement. Kathleen, you're next.
Ms. Holland, before you speak, if I may speak for a moment, Chairman, as you may recall, I was not a commission member at the time that the application for permit 171853 was originally heard and decided. And in preparing for the hearing this evening, it came to my attention that I have a conflict of interest relating to both agenda item 11 and 12. So with your approval, I will be recusing myself from this matter and leaving the meeting, the remainder of the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. Any other comments before Kathleen? Kathleen?
No, good evening, everyone. Kathleen Holland, Director of Inland Wetlands and Watercourses for the record. Also on the call this evening, I just want to acknowledge Town Attorney Peter Gelderman is also on the call this evening for review anything that the commission members may have. As you know from last month, a notice of violation was issued to 17 and 23 Hill Street regarding two particular items. The items were referenced in the notice of violation dated May 6th that was received by the applicant and their consultants. The two particular items in the notice of violation are specific to some test holes that were done outside of the permit that is currently for the property regarding the crossing. I just want to go back a little bit in history briefly to refresh the commission members' memory. Wetland permit 171853 was issued by the commission in November of 2018. The parameters of this particular permit are specific to the installation of a 16-foot wide driveway and some other mitigation areas that are very specific and so detailed on a McCord engineering plan that limits the limit of construction is well defined on the approved plan issued by the commission. Again, a little bit more history here. The permit was approved, as I said, in 2018. Along with that approval and the review that was done by the commission, there were multiple meetings by the commission. In addition, a notice of intervention was filed by interveners, and the intervener decision was also taken up by the commission and in favor of the applicant, and no issue further with the notice of intervention. No appeal was taken at that time of the decision by the commission to issue the permit for the crossing. So 2018, fast forward to last summer, July, August of 2021, Carp Associates notified the office that they had intended to actually start working on the crossing for the permit related to 1718. One of the conditions of the permit was that the applicant obtain was a rather lengthy resolution, but one of the conditions was that they hire a site monitor to oversee the engineering and construction activities associated with the crossing. The applicant did hire DeAndre Associates, and I believe Derek, I'm not sure how to pronounce Derek's last name, Derek Danius is on the call this evening and is representing Mr. Carp regarding site inspections. So the activities did start last summer and continued through the fall. Mr. Danius had been providing routine communications with the office regarding the construction activities going along in accordance with the conditions of the permit, in addition to providing 10 or so site monitoring reports, which everything was going according to plan. There was a slight delay or shutdown in the project just while they waited for some engineering regarding the culvert design and the crossing to be actually constructed offsite and then brought to the site. So there was a gap in time where no activities were taking place at the site. In March of 2021, some issues were starting to be brought to our attention, and that will be discussed in the next matter. But the short of it is when I was notified that there was some excavator digging on the property, and that was, I guess, in early May, I did issue the notice of violation regarding the test holes once I confirmed that those test holes had been done in the upland review area. And then secondly, there was a decent amount of material that had been pushed beyond the limit of construction on the site. In specifically drilling down on those two issues, kind of co-mingled with this notice of violation, we did start to get some replies from the applicant's consultants regarding other issues that were raised in the Trinkus matter, which will be discussed in the next item on the agenda. So as far as the notice of violation, I am in agreement with Bill Kenny, who is the soil scientist for this application, that the test holes that were done were actually minor in nature, very limited, 3 or 4, maybe approximately outside of wetlands. That was good, not in wetlands. And they are not causing any issues on the site. And I agree with Mr. Kenny's findings in that regard in his reply regarding that. I do not completely agree with Mr. Kenny regarding the fill that has been pushed outside the limits of construction, which is in the approval of the permit that the commission had issued, and is in an area that's upgrading from a wetlands and partially in the upland review area to the wetlands. The activity of the fill being pushed outside of limit of construction was documented, and in the reply that DeAndrea's office has also included in the reply to the office. So my recommendation, as you saw from the staff report, would be that the fill that has been pushed outside of limit of construction be removed from the site to an appropriate location, and that area be restored to its original condition or to a stabilized state. Those are my comments for right now regarding the notice of violation. And Mr. Chairman, would you like to hear next from the applicant? If so, I need to allow them to share the screen, and I'm just not sure who might be speaking. I know Attorney Smith. Well, he can unmute. Anyone can unmute themselves, but if you have a presentation that's going to also be done, I just need to know who that person might be.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Yes, Attorney Smith.
It can be challenging with the Zoom, but for the record, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Director Holland. For the record, my name is Chris Smith. I am a land use attorney with the law firm of Alter and Pearson, and I appear before you this evening on behalf of the owner, Hill Street 72 LLC. And with me this evening on behalf of the owner, we have Arnold Karp, as well as Paul Stone, both of Karp Associates, Inc. We also have our professional civil engineer, Derek Dwanis of DeAndrea Surveying and Engineering, PC. And then finally, we have our professional wetland scientist, who also is a professional landscape architect, Bill Kenny of William Kenny Associates. As Director Holland indicated, the subject NOV, that's item 11 on the agenda, does comprise 2 different components. The one involves three test pits that were done within a 3-hour time period on the subject property. They were in the upland review area, and my client honestly did not understand that there was any type of permit that was required for that. I've been practicing for about 39 years in the state, and all I do is land use, and I served on a wetlands commission for about 16 years. And I have to say that throughout the state, doing test pits in upland review areas, it's a inconsistent approach, to say the least, with the different towns. We do realize now that it was expected that we received possibly an administrative review and approval from Director Holland, and we certainly apologize for not having done that. We did have Mr. Kenny, again, our professional wetland scientist, go out to the site to review the 3 test pits. There were 3 test pits that were done. They were covered back up. And as Mr. Kenny indicates in his report of May 12th, 2022, in response to the work order NOV issued by Director Holland, that there were no adverse impacts that were created when those test pits were done, nor are any occurring today. As to the material that is on the property, that involves some fill that was associated with the construction of the driveway. It was pushed back, and as Derek indicates, Mr. Jonas indicates in his report of May 5th, 2022, it was kept in the, none of this occurred in a wetlands, just there's absolutely no direct wetlands impact. Some of that material did end up in being stored in the upland review area. A fair amount of it is outside of the upland review area. But as Director Holland indicated, it appears outside of the limit of disturbance that was the subject to the approval in 2018 for the wetlands permit. And as recommended by Director Holland, my client is more than willing to remove that material. Again, that's associated with the, is associated with the construction of the driveway and the utilities that are the subject of the permit from the property down to the prior elevations, and will provide restoration with plantings. And Mr. Kenny can address that specifically with the commission if you'd like to hear that this evening, to restore that area of the site. As indicated in both of those reports, the activity that has occurred to date concerning the construction of the access driveway is within the scope and is within the regulated activities and construction as approved by the commission that is the subject of the 2018 permit. There's some additional work that has to be done, but in response to this request from Director Holland to cease any activities, and there, as the commission is probably aware, there is a order with the Army Corps. We stopped work, my client stopped work, otherwise that material probably, much of it would have been removed from the property. But again, my client is willing to abide by the recommendations of Director Holland and remove that material from the property. And then we look forward to actually completing the activities and the construction activities associated with the permit that was granted by this commission in 2018. If you have any questions, both Derek and Bill are here this evening, our civil engineer and our wetland scientist. And if you'd like to hear from Mr. Kenny, he can explain the restoration, or Derek, relative to any restoration activities associated with what Director Holland has requested. And we're more than happy or more than willing to submit a final plan for that, for Director Holland's review. Thank you.
And any comments or questions from the commission?
Dan, could I just add one thing? Attorney
Yes.
Smith mentioned that the Army Corps has a parallel review going on under their jurisdiction and rules. I did have the opportunity to speak with Corey Rose, who's from the Army Corps, regarding the fill and my recommendation to remove the fill. The Army Corps has no jurisdiction over the fill in that area. They have they have no objection to the recommendation by the staff to remove the fill and have that area restored.
All right. I asked the question again. Does anyone have any questions of to present to Mr. Attorney Smith? All right. We have our next meeting on July 18th, Attorney Smith. We would like to have this done between now and the 18th of July, removing that, that debris. And then we would like to have you or someone else come in and tell us that it's done, and that's basically it. And then from then on, we'll discuss it, and that should be satisfactory, I think, with the commission. Does the commission have any comments on what I just said? Okay.
The only thing I would add is, in addition to the removal, the restoration.
Yes.
Mr. Stepanek, my name is Mark Durkin. I'd like to be heard on the notice of violation on behalf of the New Canaan residents against destructive development. I am a statutorily agreed party in that I am within 100 feet of the borderline of this property. And we were the agency that reported the violation of Mr. Carp operating the backhoe and digging 5 test pits, not 3. If you look at Mr. Kinney's report dated May 12th, in his first paragraph, he says it was 5 test pits, not 3. But I'd like to be heard on the rest of the notice of violation, if I may.
Mr. Chairman, Kathleen Holland for the record. I apologize, Mr. Durkin, you are correct. It's 5. As you know, there's a lot of documentation in the materials that we're reviewing. The point of the test holes is that they are not causing an adverse impact to the wetlands. So that is why I went with a recommendation of the commission that the test holes are not necessarily something that needs to be restored or repaired. I am insisting upon that the fill be removed from the area that's outside of limit of construction, because that is much more potential for an effect on the wetland should it be migrating downhill. As you heard, Attorney Smith has represented that the applicant, the owner of the property, is in agreement with the removal of that fill. Furthermore, Mr. Chairman, I would like to have I'd like to hear from Mr. Kenny tonight. It sounds like he's actually prepared to at least discuss what he would recommend for the removal and restoration of that area. And then furthermore, I'd like to have that in writing prior to the actual implementation. And then if it can be done over the next month, that would be actually a better plan to then furthermore get that area restored and vegetated before we lose too much of, before we get into, believe it or not, the winter months. So, and to Mr. Durkin's point, he absolutely has the right to speak tonight. He is the intervening party. I did send the intervention notice to all the commission members, and Mr. Gelderman can discuss that further if the commission needs to hear more about that. So we will need to hear from Mr. Durkin and his whoever will be speaking on their behalf regarding the notice of violation, but it's specific to the test holes and the fill being removed.
That's correct. And I'll defer to Mr. Kenny and I'll respond after he does his presentation.
Well, is Mr. Kenny in the audience right now?
For the record,
Yes,
Mr. Chairman, Chris Smith and Mr. Kenny is here, and Mr. Durkin is correct, and it's in Mr. Kenny's first line there. I think that there were 5 test holes in the upland
Okay.
review on the fringe, and I think I might have been differentiating between upland review and being outside and within it, but I will turn it over to Mr. Kenny at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Bill Kenny. I'm the principal of William Kenny Associates in Fairfield. I'm a professional wetland scientist, soil scientist, and landscape architect. Here this evening on behalf of the committee. With regard to the removing of the fill in the woodland area, it has been placed in such a way that there hasn't been the removal of the canopy, the trees that are surrounding it. So it's in a relatively shaded area, and the ground cover in this area is very limited due to deer browse and typical conditions that we have in lower Fairfield County. So what I'm proposing is that we put a seed mix down to stabilize the soil. There's a particular mix that's prepared by New England Wetland Plants, native plant nursery in Massachusetts, that is for applications such as this. It's was originally developed for logging roads through woodlands where you have some sunlight, but it's mostly shade. So it's a mix of plants that are tolerant of shadier conditions and some soil disturbance within woodland areas. So we're proposing we would remove the fill, put that seed mix down, hay the surface for temporary stabilization while that seed mix takes hold. And then by the fall, due to all the trees that are surrounding, when their leaves fall, they're going to provide that natural mulch surface that all woodlands have that help to keep the soil stabilized.
Thank you.
And I'm pleased to submit a brief specification for the record and for any comments that you or Kathleen may have.
George? Nothing? You're muted, George.
No, I was just thinking about it.
Oh, okay.
But I have no questions at this point. I think the presentation from Mr. Smith has been complete, and there's no questions on my part at this time. It might be a little bit later.
Any other comments?
Yes, Commissioner, I'm happy to comment now if that's appropriate.
Oh, just if I may, sorry, Mr. Durkin, just for the record, Chris Smith, just to respond to the commission's questions before, and Director Holland, we can commit to having that work done in a timely fashion when working with Director Holland and the commission in the next couple of weeks before your July 18th meeting. I just wanted to report that to you.
Good, good. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Durkin, you have some comments now?
Yes.
About
Commissioner,
this,
thank you.
about this? We're going to move on to number 12. Wait a minute. Excuse me. Excuse me. 1 minute.
Excuse me, I have not commented on number 11.
If we just hold on just a minute there, Mr. Durkin, we'll get ourselves organized here. I'll make sure you get a chance to comment.
Thank you.
Dan, if you can unmute yourself. Dan, if you can unmute yourself. Oh, there
Okay,
you go.
I'm unmuted.
If I'm not mistaken, and Attorney Gelderman, feel free to jump in. Mr. Durkin, as the intervening party, has the right to speak on the notice of violation. So we should stick with number, what are we on? 10, is it?
11.
Number 11.
Number 11. And if there are no other questions from commission members, would that be the next step?
That would be, yep.
I do have one question. I just want to make sure that, I mean, should there be some sort of oversight from the town or from an outside specialist to ensure that the removal of this fill is going to, comply not only with like making sure that the wetlands are back to, getting back to the original soil area? And is it pulled back, and is the fill going to be pulled back to the original spot? I mean, should we have some sort of oversight on that? Or?
I would agree with that, Anthony. Yeah, given all the paperwork and filings and so forth, I think an independent monitor would be advisable in this case.
Attorney Smith?
Just for the record, Chris Smith, just want to point out that the fill material is outside of the wetlands members of the commission, and they'll just be driven off the property on the existing driveway that's been constructed per the permit. So I just wanted to be clear on that. There is no fill located within a wetlands, and removing that fill will not involve going into the wetlands. It'll just be a matter of driving it up into the driveway that's been built per your approval, putting that material on a vehicle, and then taking it off the property. Just so that you understood that. I just wanted to be clear.
No, totally understand. I just want to get, there's some, we have a lot of paperwork here, and a lot of site plans and a lot of good stuff here. So what I want to just make sure is, one, how far away is that? I know it's in the uplands. How far away is that from the existing wetlands? One, because I also know, I'm in construction. I understand that things get, disturbed by mistake or whatever. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and how close it is, and make sure that we do it in a proper manner.
And
we'll certainly...
yes, this is Angela Jameson. I too wanted to make the point that some of the material is in the upland review area, and there is a risk of, erosion that could potentially harm the wetlands. And I'd just like to second the suggestion of Anthony Sillo that there is some kind of external monitoring of this.
Attorney Smith, what was the purpose of digging the test holes?
That was for soil testing for a potential future development of the property, but that's why those test pits were done, was to determine the soil permeability. That's my understanding.
So what'd you find out?
I didn't find anything out, Mr. Chairman. I'm just a country land use lawyer. That's, but in all seriousness, that's why the test pits were done, as they would have been done for any potential review. But again, if perhaps Mr. DeAndrea's office can continue to monitor, I believe were actually brought in to monitor initially and have been retained. The soil removal. I know that they're very familiar with the existing conditions on the property at this point, but that's subject to the commission.
What do you think, Kathleen?
May I be heard, please?
I'm sorry, what?
May I be heard on the issue of retaining DeAndrea Survey and Engineering as the site monitor?
Just a minute, Mr. Durkin. Let me just try to answer the commission members' questions regarding, it sounds like it's somebody other, an additional reviewer. As far as the area that's the area in which the fill has been relocated to, it's readily obvious, honestly, in my opinion, of where it is outside of the limit of disturbance. And as far as the removal of the fill that is there, there's topographical information on the existing drawings. You can very quickly tell where you're getting into the fill that needs to come out versus where the existing contour is. You certainly could, I suppose, get an additional reviewer, such as an engineer. I'm not sure how exactly that works in this situation as far as a notice violation, and that would be, I assume, the town paying for that reviewing party. It's not a budgeted item that I have in my budget, so I'm not sure exactly how that would work. Those are my thoughts.
Well, it would seem to me that if you came in on the 18th, Attorney Smith, and told us it's gone, or you moved it, and then some sort of documentation we would receive, I don't know if we need a site visit or an inspector or something to look at it, but I'll leave it up to the commission members if we want an oversight on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would be looking at it, and that is my
You'll
responsibility
be looking,
to
yeah.
make sure that the area has been restored to the specifications that Mr.
Right.
Kenny is going to provide. I certainly can bring out, the town engineer with me to look at it as well, if you felt that was needed. And also, Mr. Kenny and DeAndrea's office all hold certifications and licenses in order to certify what they are, providing the information to the commission. So I think, a certified letter of sorts from upon completion is a reasonable ask by the commission. And I also will take a look at it and see that it's been done properly and able to be restored and stabilized.
Good. All right.
Mr.
Fine.
Chairman, for the record, Chris Smith, we're more than willing to have both Mr. Kenny and Mr. Dwanis provide the commission with letters on their letterhead there, as Director Holland indicated. Mr. Kenny is, well, as I indicated before, they're both professionals and licensed, and Mr. Kenny is a professional wetland scientist here in the state. Mr. Dwanis, a licensed professional engineer. So we can provide you with that verification that it's been
Great.
restored the way that we've represented that we will restore it to you this evening. Thank you.
Commissioner Sillo has an awesome idea to get another site monitor on behalf of the town. What you have to understand is DeAndrea Surveying and Engineering is the proponent and the preparer of the site grading plan that was submitted to the fire commissioner and the Department of Public Works on May 6th, I believe it was, October 6th of 2021, to support the affordable housing complex that Mr. Karp is intending to build on the Hill Street property. So you have a serious conflict of interest where you have the engineer who's being paid by Mr. Karp to develop the plans to build the affordable housing complex, is also now acting as site monitor on behalf of the town. That, to me, is a very serious conflict of interest. DeAndrea Surveying should have never even taken the site monitoring position on behalf of the town and the residents of New Canaan. And therefore, Mr. Commissioner Sillo's suggestion of getting an independent engineering review of what's been going on is definitely warranted and needed. Don't forget that that stockpiling of materials, I go by the site every single morning, has been going on for almost 2 months. So where has Mr. Donays from the engineering, DeAndrea, where has he been? Mr. Karp is the one who did the actual 5 test pits, and there was another individual there with plans and maps. I believe, and I can't confirm this, that that might have been an individual from DeAndrea himself. And if it was, he knew that you can't dig test pits in an upland area outside the area from the permit. And he knew that you can't stockpile materials outside the permitted area. And yet he didn't report it. We were the ones who filmed it, and we were the ones who reported it. So there are very serious repercussions from allowing DeAndrea Engineering or Rocco v. DeAndrea Surveying, which is the identical company, same principles, same office address, same telephone number, and the Mr. Donays, who was hired by the site manager under Rocco DeAndrea, submits all of the site monitoring reports on letterhead of DeAndrea Surveying and Engineering. So clearly, there are 2 companies, one of a kind, same company, and they have a serious conflict of interest. And I think Commissioner Sillo's suggestion is right on the money and should be undertaken by the commission.
Okay. Well, Kathleen's going to be there with the town. We're not talking about Mr. Andreas. We're talking about Kathleen's going to take a look at it, okay? Do you know?
Well, Ms. Holland didn't discover the violations of the digging, the test holes, and the stockpiling of materials. The stockpiling has been there for months. Ms. Holland didn't even appear at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers site meeting with the Connecticut DEEP, and Ms. Holland was invited. She didn't show. So I suspect that Ms. Holland has enough to do other than engaging in engineering review of what Mr. Karp does on the Hill Street property. So again, I urge the commission to consider Commissioner Sillo's recommendation. I'd also like to go on and comment about the notice of violation and put it in context as to the flagrant nature of the violation for purposes of determining an appropriate remedy. In addition to removal of the materials, there should be per diem fines assessed against Mr. Karp on this property for the flagrant nature of his violations that have occurred. There's 2 separate violations here. We have the digging of 5 test pits by Mr. Karp in his backhoe without a permit. He can't blame it on a laborer, and based upon Mr. Karp's level of sophistication as a developer, he knows that when you build outside a permitted area in uplands of wetlands, then he needs a permit. For him to claim anything to the contrary is not believable, in my opinion. The second violation is stockpiling materials. Now, what the commission needs to understand is they've been there for months, number 1. Number 2, we have concrete evidence that Mr. Karp has been trucking materials, fill materials in from an illegal dump site and illegal quarry in Monroe. We have video of the trucks coming out and going all the way down to New Canaan and dumping into the driveway in the wetlands. There are notices of violation issued against that site in Monroe for not having proper permits, for importing and exporting materials of unknown origin and character. There are cease and desist orders. All of the deliveries that we have filming on him were done while the cease and desist orders were in place. There's 2 of them, while notices of violation were in place and while citations were issued against his activities. Again, he's got no permit to operate the quarry nor to accept dumping materials of unknown origin and content. So as you can see, Mr. Karp has gone beyond just an innocent violation of inland wetlands regulation. In addition, Mr. Karp was under a notice of violation issued in February by the Army Corps of Engineers to do no further work on the property. And again, in April, the Army Corps of Engineers issued another letter to Mr. Karp advising him that he could do no work at all until he receives a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. As of this week, Mr. Karp has not even applied for a permit for the Army Corps. In addition, the Army Corps' letter of April 27, 2022 specifically says that the stream crossing does not appear to be designed and constructed to avoid and minimize adverse effects to the maximum extent practical in accordance with general condition number 3 of the Inland Wetlands Permit. So the Army Corps has already determined that the driveway was not built or designed in accordance with the permit conditions, which we'll get into more in the petition to revoke his permit. But in terms of, and that letter was issued on April 27th to Mr. Karp. On May 3rd, 6 days later, he ignored the Army Corps notice of violation. He ignored the do not do any work in the April 27, 22 letter from the Army Corps. And he went out, he took his backhoe, he dug 5 test pits, and he's been stockpiling materials for months out there. So when you're considering the appropriateness of what remedy should be issued or what enforcement action should be issued, you should definitely be considering not only the removal of the materials and the restoration of the wetlands as they existed prior to the stockpiling of the materials, but you should also consider per diem fines against Mr. Karp's activities that are flagrant disregard of the commission's jurisdiction, the permit requirements, and the law in the state of Connecticut.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Appreciate that. Do you have any comments, Mr. Smith?
Just a
All right,
couple
attorney.
of, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Just a few.
Okay.
What I'd like to point out to the commission that the material has been on the property, this material that we're talking about that's associated with the construction of the crossing, that again is this that was approved by the commission with the wetlands permit in 2018. That has been where it is located today because both the Corps and eventually Director Holland told my client to stop work. That the NOV actually occurred on March 17th of 2022 from the Corps, not back in February. So that's why that material is still there today, in honoring and abiding by the Corps' instructions. We did have a site visit with the Army Corps and a representative from Connecticut Deep. And at that point in time, we were told that we didn't have to do anything further with the activity that has occurred to date, and that we should work with Director Holland and this commission to continue on. We discussed the next steps with the Corps, but with the Corps and DEP, I think it's fair to DEP. It's fair to say that there was nothing of concern that they found at the site on the day that they were there, not surprising, because as indicated by Mr. Kenny and Mr. Duanis, that there is no adverse impact that's occurring to a wetland or a water course at that property today, nor has any occurred during any of the construction activities. It's just simply not there. It's just fabrication. It hasn't occurred. The expert testimony, there's no adverse impact with anything there. It's in the work that's been done to date is within the scope and consistent with this commission's approval. I know the neighbors would like to go back and revisit that and redo that application all over again. And I think it's important for the commission to know that it's my understanding, and my client can confirm this, that there's a licensed environmental professional that's been brought onto the site that my client acquired a quarry up in Monroe, where there were a number of issues, and my client has worked with my understanding with the state as well there, and with the town of Monroe to address those issues that were associated with that quarry that, again, my client did purchase. And quite honest with you, whatever occurred in Monroe, whether my client or their predecessor, has nothing to do with this driveway crossing, this access way that this commission approved, and that's the subject of the halt work order that's before you this evening. Mr. Chairman, in light of the fact that a 22A19 petition, intervention petition, I'm very familiar with how they work. I've filed many over the course of my career. I know Attorney Gelderman is familiar with it as well. I just have a couple of quick questions for my experts because again, it was filed and the burden is on the petitioners or the interveners to establish that their claims are accurate with expert testimony. And I would just like to ask a couple of questions of both of our professionals, Mr. Chairman, on our team concerning the intervention, if I may, and it'll be very quick, just for the record.
All right, so what, we're moving now, are you
Oh.
moving now into the revocation of the Inland Wetlands permit? Or
Not yet, Mr. Chairman. It's my
not
understanding.
yet?
that we have-
Okay, not yet, okay.
We have a petition filed in both, or an intervention under 22A19 in both of these matters. So I just want to be clear on the record. As Mr. Durkin indicated, he has allegedly has standing, but again, there has been a 22A19 petition filed in this matter. And I would just like to ask both Mr. Duenas and Mr. Kenny if they've had an opportunity to review that intervention and the support material, and in particular, material submitted by Mr. Trinkus. That's my first question, and I have a second one. So
Go
if I
ahead.
can ask that.
Ask the
Derek.
question, yeah, you've asked it. Go ahead,
Derek?
go ahead.
With all due respect, Commissioner, that report was filed in connection with our petition to revoke his permit. So there's no purpose in terms of the notice of violation of determining Trinkus' statements relative to the petition to revoke the permit. So I don't understand the relevancy or the connection at all from the question about Trinkus in relation to the notice of violation that the one notice of violation that has two independent violations that everyone agrees with.
Mr. Chairman, just to respond to that, if an intervention pleading has been submitted, the burden is on the interveners to establish with substantial expert testimony that the conduct that's the subject of the halt work order is resulting or is reasonably likely to result in the unreasonable pollution or impairment, destruction in the air, water, or other natural resource of the state. I just would like to ask my experts if they've reviewed the various materials submitted by the interveners, and then if they have an opinion on those claims, and so that the commission will have the benefit of having that expert testimony in the record. I didn't file the petition in this matter. Someone else did, and I need to respond to it. I have an obligation, and so does my client to this commission, never mind to my client to respond to it. So
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yes, the petition.
So without
is
further
on number
interruption,
12.
hopefully-
Mr. Durkin,
If I may, the petition is number 12 on the agenda tonight. We're on number 11. So we're not going to, you should not prejudge number 12 in the context of number 11. I understand what our burden of proof is. We're prepared to meet that burden when the petition, which is number 12 on the agenda, comes up for discussion.
if I can just continue, Mr. Chairman, and for whether it's considered relevant or not by Mr. Durkin, I think it's relevant, and I just would like I have a right, just would like to ask my two experts these two questions without interruption, hopefully.
and let's make it quick, so we have a lot to do, so, okay.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
first question. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were
No,
done.
go ahead, sir, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry, sir. Two quick questions for Derek and Bill, and if you can just identify yourself in responding. Have you had an opportunity to review the intervention pleading submitted by the interveners under 22A19 and their support material, and in particular, any material submitted by Mr. Trinkus concerning this matter?
Good evening. This is Derek Donay from DeAndrea Surveying and Engineering, and yes, I have reviewed that material.
And Mr. Kenny?
Yes, this is Bill Kenny, and I have reviewed that material.
And in your opinion, based on your knowledge of the subject property and the work completed to date, does any of the work that has occurred or that is required to be completed, such as doing the restoration work with the material on site, as has been discussed as part of this halt work order, as provided pursuant to the existing wetlands permit and at the request of Director Holland and this commission, have the reasonable likelihood of resulting in the unreasonable pollution, impairment, or destruction of the air, water, and in particular, any on-site or off-site wetland or water courses or other natural resource of the state?
Derek Donay from DeAndrea again. No, what has been constructed so far will not have any additional adverse impacts to the wetlands or water courses.
Or unreasonably result in unreasonable pollution?
Correct.
Mr. Kenny?
Yes, this is Bill Kenny. No, it's not likely.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, Director Holland.
Thank you. Peter Gelman, do you have any comments at all on this?
No, other than Attorney Smith is correct about the standard. When a petition is filed under 22A19, it's not enough just to allege unreasonable pollution. It has to be established by expert testimony, and which, you know, as opposed to a layperson giving their opinion. So there hasn't been any yet. Maybe there will be. There wasn't so far on this item 11 because a 22A19 petition was filed, I believe, in both matters. So in the absence of expert testimony, the commission would likely make a finding under 22A19 that there is no likelihood of unreasonable pollution to the air, water, natural resources of the state.
Thank you. Any other comments? Should we move on to number 12? 17 and 23 Hill Street. Petition to revoke inland wetlands permit 17/18/53 issued to Hill Street, New Canaan residents against destructive development. Who's going to lead that? Mr. Durkin, are you leading that one?
Yes, I will be, Commissioner.
Okay. You have the floor.
Yes, I'd just like to add that Mr. Jeffrey Stein is going to assist me so that when we want to share the screen, that it would go to Mr. Stein, who would put up the documentation, and then I will be heard speaking in the background while the document is on the screen.
Kathleen, we can do split screen like that, can't we? Go ahead. Can you hear me, Kathleen?
Just give me a minute here to find Mr. Stein, and then I will make him a co-host so he'll be able to share his screen. At the moment, I'm not finding him. Oh, there he is. Okay. So, Mr. Durkin, if I understood correctly, Mr. Stein will be running the presentation and you don't need to be made a co-host. You'll be doing the audio only?
Yes, I will be doing the audio while he will be sharing the screen with documentation.
Okay, you should be all set.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Commission members, thank you for an opportunity finally to allow us to present our petition to revoke and/or in the alternative suspend permit number 17-18-53. As a procedural comment, our petition was filed on March 17th of this year. We have asked repeatedly for an opportunity to present at a public hearing. Most of those requests were ignored. Then on Thursday at 11:03 a.m., I received an email from Kathleen Holland advising me that our petition has been put on this Monday's hearing or public meeting for discussion. And I was asked to get any documentation I needed to submit in support to her office on the same day within 4.5 hours. I'm not sure that that is proper notice of our petition being scheduled for an agenda, but nevertheless, we met the unusually short and time requirements, and we're prepared to go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Durkin. Thank you.
There are many grounds. There's approximately 6 grounds on which we rely to vacate the permit of Mr. Karp 17-18-53. The first one is that Mr. Karp's construction of the driveway is in violation of a number of aspects of the permit that was issued. We have submitted 2 reports from Stephen Trinkus to the commission in support of our contentions of violations of the actual permit conditions and construction provisions. The first report was dated March 14th, 2022. And the second report was submitted to the commission this week, and that was June 16th, 2022. Mr. Trinkus, who is an engineer, licensed engineer in the state of Connecticut, is on the Zoom currently. So I will ask him to make the presentation regarding the violations of the permit that he
Good, how are you?
believes and has observed exists. Mr. Trinkus?
This one? Is there?
Yes, I'm on. If you'd like me to go at this point, I'm happy to.
Go ahead, sir. Identify yourself and give us your title and all that, if you would.
Okay, my name is Stephen Trinkus. I'm a licensed professional engineer in Connecticut with an office in Southbury, Connecticut. I've been licensed since 1988 in Connecticut. I inspected the site twice, once in March and then again in June, both from the adjacent property owned by Joe Braccia to the south of where the driveway is being constructed, and made observations from that property and not going on the applicant's property. I also reviewed two responses from DeAndrea Surveillance. One was to emailed questions to Kathleen Holland, and the other was response to my comments. So I'd like to just address the first letter, which was response to emailed questions. It was directed to Kathleen Holland on May 5th, 2022. An observation was made in the field that the boulder walls on either side of this driveway, the top rocks were either cut on site or cut prior to being brought to the site. The earlier inspection in March, when the driveway was much lower, there were large, native boulders. They weren't cut. They were large rocks, placed before the boulder walls. The McCord approval showed a 16-foot wide driveway and 2-foot shoulders to the retaining walls, but the driveway surface did not go over the boulder rocks. The way the driveway is cut currently, it appears that there is an attempt perhaps to allow a larger physical driveway in here than what was approved as 16 foot. But there was no provision in the detail by McCord to allow vehicles over the boulder section of the wall itself. Secondly, it was noted that these boulders have now been secured in place with a concrete slurry. And it's visible in the field, you can see the concrete. And if the driveway is meant to be 16 foot wide, basically centered between the walls, then no vehicle should ever be near the walls itself, because you're going to have a shoulder area of 2 foot on either side. So only if the driveway was requested to be made wider for another land use would that be a potential problem. But also, this is not in conformance with the McCord plan, which did not show any type of concrete grout. As a matter of fact, the only thing shown on the McCord plan was a layer of filter fabric between the inside faces of the boulder wall and the material for the permeable pavement driveway. So the use of the grout is a violation of the permit. That's not part of your approved plan. The second letter, which is a response to my comments, the first two I do not have any comments to say. I believe the arch culvert was sized for a 25-year storm during the approval process. It really should be sized for a 100-year event, as we are getting more frequent but short duration, high intensity storms. And in the field, at least from Joe Braccia's property, there's not a lot of clearance between the material on the ground and the top of the arch in the center to perhaps pass a large storm. And if it cannot pass it, it is going to adversely affect adjacent properties with flooding. The McCord detail for number 4 does show 2 under drains in this driveway. There's also, this was to drain the water after it comes through the filter course, which is the water quality aspect of the permeable pavement. The applicant did receive a modification from this board as they hit unsuitable material, which is quite honestly no surprise. in my professional opinion, when you're putting a driveway over a wetland muck soil, the muck is clearly not a bearing material that would support the weight of this. So the modification was to dig out unsuitable material and replace it with structural fill. However, the structural fill is not part of the approved plan under permeable pavement, and I'll get into that a little bit later on. The structural fill is a mixture of blasted rock and fines. It's common when you take blasted rock from a site because it's got big stones, little stones, and very fine stuff in there. But that's not part of a permeable pavement section in any design manual. Again, the driveway was approved as 16-foot wide. Anything wider than that is a violation of the permit. There's really two controlling documents for the use of permeable pavement. The first one is the Connecticut DEP 2004 Stormwater Quality Manual, specifically section 11-S6. It's not applicable to low permeable soils or areas that are prone to frost action. Wetland soils are a low permeable soil by very definition. They are a class D soil. They have little or no infiltration capacity whatsoever. And therefore, it is not a suitable soil to have permeable pavement on top of. In addition, now we have a layer of structural fill sitting on top of the wetland soil. And there's been no infiltration testing throughout this process on the structural fill or the underlying soil to see if anything will even infiltrate. The whole purpose of permeable asphalt is to allow infiltration and recharge to groundwater. And if the soil cannot accept the water, you have a problem. And what is a bigger problem in this case is you now have basically a bathtub. You have structural compacted fill underneath the system. You have now grouted stone walls on either side where the water simply cannot bleed out through the side walls of the retaining walls. So it's going to fill up to the under drain locations and then eventually be discharged through that. But it's going to compromise the integrity because you're going to have a saturated zone now under this driveway, which during certain winter conditions, and we have not had a very cold winter the past few years, that could result in frost action within the gravel layer underneath the permeable asphalt and above the structural fill. It's not clear if sand is going to be used on this driveway, but sand, it should never be used on a permeable pavement surface because of the high potential for clogging. Pages 11S6 number 2, design considerations, again, requires field infiltration testing for this material underneath the permeable driveway to show that it actually infiltrates. It also states that it's got to be over a class A or B soil. A soils are sand and gravel soils. B would be a sandy loam type soil. Clearly a wetland soil is not anywhere close to either one of those. So this would be in violation of the DEP manual. Additionally, the bottom of the system has to be 3 feet minimum above seasonal groundwater. Well, you have a wetland that when I looked at this site prior to the development of it, you had pretty much water at grade. So the fact that this thing has been dug into the ground means you don't meet the separation of the manual at all. And you have not, it's really a violation of the standards in the Connecticut DEP Water Quality Manual. The infiltration tests refer back to another section, page 11P3, 2 and 3, which defines all the requirements for infiltration testing for any of the LID practices, whether it's permeable pavement, porous concrete, bioretention cell, any of the infiltration practices have to have infiltration testing done. None has ever been done on this site, to my knowledge. There was none done during the application process, and I do not believe any has been done now. So therefore, it's also not in compliance with the DEP manual. Again, we have a separation to groundwater, which this system clearly does not meet, as the bottom of it is sitting in what would be considered wetland muck as far as that goes. A second set of specifications is a whole product of University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center, talking about materials. And basically it has to be set into native soil. That's the whole purpose of it. And the placement of structural fill would violate that particular standard because it's not set into the native ground. So this driveway, based on my observations and my expertise in low impact development, there are numerous violations of the original permit because it simply has not been constructed in accordance with the McCord plans. Those are the controlling documents. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Attorney Smith, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Step back, it's Mark Durkin.
Who's next? Mr. Kenny?
I think Mr. Durkin's still doing his presentation. Is that correct, Mr. Durkin?
That is correct. Thank you.
But if you want us to respond, Mr. Chairman, more than happy to. I just didn't want to interrupt anybody's presentation.
Mr. Durkin, I'm sorry. Who is it? Mr. Kenny that's next? Or who do you want to talk to?
I would not be putting another witness on. I will be relying on our petition. I will be making a presentation based upon the substantial documentation and evidence that we filed in our petition and filed with Inland Wetlands earlier this week. I'm sorry, last week in accordance with Ms. Holland's requirements. So the permit in question is 1718-53. General condition 14 of that permit states, and I quote, "This permit may be revoked or suspended if the permittee exceeds the conditions or limitations of this permit or has secured this permit through deception or inaccurate information." That is one of the legal basis that our petition is based upon. Number two, Section 15.2.2 of the New Canaan Inland Wetlands Regulations provides as follows, and again, I quote, "If the commission or its duly authorized agent determines that any person has obtained a permit through deception or inaccurate information as to either the activity or its environmental impact, it may take any one of the following actions. Subprovision point 2, suspend or revoke the permit if it finds that the permittee has not complied with the terms, conditions, or limitations set forth in the permit." That is the other legal basis upon which we are moving this commission to revoke the permit. Here, the permit was procured through fraud, deception, and inaccurate information on two grounds. One, Mr. Karp continually misrepresented the development that was going to occur at the end of this driveway. And number two, he and his professionals grossly misstated the scope and area of the wetlands that were going to be disturbed by the driveway in question. Now, the two statutory bases that one statutory and the one permit conditions about deception and inaccurate information is we have substantial evidence that we've presented to this commission to support that conclusion relative to both issues. For example, Mr. Karp's true intention since 2014 has been, is, and will be to construct approximately 101 unit affordable housing apartment complex on the property. In my petition, there's an Exhibit A, which is an affidavit from Mr. Stein, and paragraphs 5 and 6. He approached Mrs. Holland in August of 2014 to say, what does she know if there's any development intended on the property? She responded that it was only approved for 2 houses, but there's talk of an affordable housing complex development going on the property. That's evidence number one. Number two, the Exhibit B to my petition is a affidavit from Allison Foxworth. In the winter of 2014 and 15, he tried to purchase the property and learned that Mr. Karp a developer in town had purchased it. She, in speaking with Ms. Karp on an unrelated issue, I'm sorry, Ms. Holland, she asked if she knew what the intended development was going to be by Mr. Karp. She was advised by Mrs. Holland that Mr. Karp intended to put an affordable housing or apartment complex on the property. That's as of late 2014, early 2015. Exhibit C to our petition is an affidavit of David DePanny. Mr. DePanny abuts the subject property to its immediate south. Mr. DePanny, knowing Mr. Karp owned the property, bumped into Mr. Karp in September of 2015 and asked Mr. Karp specifically, what do you intend to do for development on the property? Mr. Karp responded to say, I'm going to put an affordable housing complex on that property behind your house. Evidence number 3. Number 4, in October of 2021, Paul Stone of Mr. Karp's organization appeared and presented to the Assistant Fire Chief, Albert Bassett, and Tiger Mann, the Director of Public Works, a site plan approval, a site grading plan, and a fire hydrant request. If Mr. Stein can put the hydrant request up. Let me start with page 2. Attaches page 2 is the plan prepared by DeAndrea Surveying and Engineering, showing 2 buildings, 118 parking spaces surrounding the buildings, and the wetlands area surrounding the buildings, as well as, well, it's not shown here, but there is a conservation easement across the bottom of the property. So what Mr. Karp's representative did was he went to the Fire Commission and the Director of Public Works, submitted this site grading plan, as well as the fire hydrant request to approve the use of 4 hydrants for this development. And both the Fire Commissioner, Assistant Fire Chief, and the Director of Public Works signed off on it, as you can see on page 1 of the fire hydrant request. Both signed off on this on October 6th of 2021. I have prepared an affidavit that I've recently filed dated June 16th of 2022. On May 24th, 2022, Ms. Corey Rose from the Army Corps of Engineers conducted a site visit of the Hill Street property and the driveway that's been constructed to date. I appeared to participate in that site visit. Mr. Karp asked me to leave. So I stepped off his property onto Mr. Joe Braccia's, and I was approximately 12 feet from the discussion. Mr. Karp, in front of the DEEP, in front of the Army Corps of Engineers, in front of his attorney, Christopher Smith, and another individual from DeAndrea, told Mrs. Rose from the Army Corps that the driveway was leading to a affordable housing complex that would be built in the back, in the rear, in a wooded area. I overheard that, and it was stated in front of his own attorney. Mr. Karp then approached me, and I asked him, Mr. Karp, I just heard you tell Ms. Rose that you're building an affordable housing complex in the woods. Is that correct? And he said to me, yes, it's going to be an affordable housing complex, and I will be filing a permit application for it. So we have multiple sources of direct evidence proving that Mr. Karp's intent from the summer of 2014 through today's date and through May 24th at the site visit of the Army Corps, that he has never intended to build 2 single family residences. While he told the commission that throughout his first modification application in 16, his second modification application in 17, his new permit application in 18, his permit to dig 15,000 square foot more of wetlands in 2019, and his next permit application in 2021 to dig 4 to 5 feet deeper into the wetlands. Each time he, his attorney, his landscape architect, his engineers, his soil scientist, all represented in every single one of their filings that the driveway was going to service or provide access to 2 single-family residential homes. In my affidavit, which is attached as Exhibit D to the petition, contains a series of the examples of representations contained in the filings from 2016 through 2021. Those are located at paragraphs 18A to 18N of my affidavit. In an effort to not take up too much time and to be repetitive, I direct the commission to paragraphs 18A through 18N of my affidavit, which is attached to the petition as Exhibit D. Also, I would like to bring up the McCord SE1 plan dated April 11th of 2019. That plan was submitted to the commission after the permit 1718-53 was granted as a final plan for approval. As you can see, there's only 2 single-family residential homes that are shown on the McCord engineering plan SE1. This clearly is evidence of his intent not to withdraw it. This is an example of the misrepresentations that were made by Mr. Karp and his professionals throughout the entire permit process for the 2018 permit. In addition, Mr. Karp was so bold as to get up at the public hearings in February of 17, in September of 18, and in October of 19 to deny that this development was going to be anything other than 2 single-family residences. And I'd like to play those videos for the commission right now so that the commission can understand what representations were made to you people when he knew as early as 2014 he had no intention of putting 2 single-family residences.
Mr. Durkin, how long are these? May I ask that?
They're very short. They're a few minutes.
Okay, 10 seconds, okay. Wait, there's no sound.
All right, so on YouTube, I'll mute.
And we're looking to go to 16 feet, which would be more in the town planning and zoning code and allow for a safer entry to the 2 lots. The last time we were here, a little differently than back then. And the 16-foot access way, it still only allows for 2 cars, doesn't allow for any more development than the 2 lots. So from our perspective, we can see nothing on the downside that would prevent approval.
Is anyone going to be presenting at that expense? And really, what we're seeing is a much more robust access way. And I also heard tonight that it's to avoid conflicts between the neighbors because a 12-foot access way with a turnoff would create problems. And by adding just 4 feet in a shared access way, you're going to avoid those problems. I'm not really buying that. And what my client, and frankly, I suspect is you are creating a wider much more robust access to a property. And my client's concern is that whether through this applicant or through the subsequent owner, really this is opening up this property to a much larger and more intense development than just two large homes. And my understanding in driving here this evening, I saw a lot of for sale signs on large homes in New Canaan. And that further adds to my suspicion that there are other plans for this property that this wider access would provide a safer access for a higher volume of activity. So my client is here tonight to oppose the modification. And once again, my client can be tolerably unhappy with the 12 feet.
Good evening. I'm Arnold Karp. I'm one of the principals of Full Street LLC. At the last month's hearing, there were two very important points that were raised by Attorney Green and his client. The first one, the reason I'm here is to address that. This application and the intention is that there will only be built two houses be built on this property. That's what this application is about. In my not-for-profit life, working for the town of New Canaan, I'm busily getting a moratorium for the town on their affordable housing. So this has nothing to do with that. That's a Canaan Parish project, of which I'm a member of that board. You'll be hearing that application at a later date. But this is solely for this piece of property. Is only a two-house subdivision that's already been approved, but it was raised. Nobody knew what was happening. It is two houses. That's all it's going to be. The other, it's only for two houses. As Attorney Finn said, we will be coming back when we have houses designed. And as far as the dumping, that certainly isn't from us. We're not at the property or doing anything in that manner. Thank you. Driveway. It's not a highway. I mean, using the same thing. There should be no road in Canaan that's built that drains into a water course, because there's more oil and grease that come off those than will ever come off of this, which will handle probably 2 or 3 car trips versus 130 on an average road. So I've heard all the consultants speak, but the real question is the revised plan a better, safer, more environmentally friendly plan? I believe that you've heard that it is.
As you can see, Mr. Karp says it's not going to be an affordable housing project like the Canaan Parish project was. Mr. Karp says this is not going to be a highway. It's going to be 2 or 3 car trips a day, as opposed to 130 coming from an affordable housing complex where all the oil and rubber and antifreeze and salt and sand from the cars can end up in the wetlands. So he has made substantial misrepresentations for almost 7 years to this commission, and clearly made those in the context of his inland wetlands application 15-17-53. Now, the only issue that I can see under permit condition number 14 or under the inland wetlands regulations 15.2.2 is whether we have presented credible evidence that his true intention from 2014 through to the present is that he intended to do the full affordable housing apartment complex on this property. And we have 3 affidavits that say that. We have my affidavit that says it. We have documentation that says it, that he's filed with 2 New Canaan agencies in this town. That is substantial evidence. And the only issue under the permit condition and the statute is whether the permit 1718-53 was procured through deception and inaccurate information. And on his development intent, absolutely it was. There's also a second ground for deception and inaccurate information that was provided to the commission. And that was on the extent of the disruption of the wetlands in the context of square footage that was going to be disturbed. Inland's Wetlands Decision 14-202 dated June 30th of 2014, the commission granted the application by the McLean family to put a 12-foot wide driveway on this property. In that, Kate Throckmorton, who was the landscape architect at the time for the McLean family, said that decreasing the drive from 16 to 12 feet would decrease the impacts on the wetlands. And that her report is exhibit 20 to my affidavit attached to the petition. In June of 2016, Mr. Karp filed his first permit modification application to the McLean permit number 14-02. He asked to increase the width of the driveway from 12 feet to 16 feet, plus two 2-foot wide buffers to decrease the disturbance in the wetlands from 930 square feet to 750 square feet. That is the McCord letter dated June 20th of 16. It's attached to my affidavit as exhibit 21. Clearly, if he's now claiming that going to a wider driveway is going to decrease the disturbance, then Kate Throckmorton's statements in the permit are not accurate. In January of 17, Mr. Karp filed a second permit application to modify the McLean permit. The McCord report that he submitted in connection with it says that the wetlands designation in the prior reports were understated and that the wetlands were actually larger than what Mr. Karp's soil scientist had previously represented to the commission. Then on July 20th of 16, Kate Throckmorton issued a report that said if the 2-foot wide buffers were removed, then the disturbance would decrease from 930 square feet to 450. She said most of the driveway would be removed from the wetlands and 5 mature trees would be saved. That is exhibit 23 to my affidavit attached to my petition. So now we've got a substantially reduced disturbance than what was previously represented. On June 16, 2018, Mr. Karp filed his new permit application in his own LLC name to go to 16-foot plus 2 2-foot wide buffer strips. The McCord and Throckmorton now, in the context of this application, admit that the 16-foot driveway with 2-foot buffers would now disturb 2,036 square feet of wetlands. That's 210% more than the 2014 application and over 300% more than they calculated in the modification applications filed in 2016 and 17. And those reports from McCord and Throckmorton are exhibit 24 and 25 to my affidavit. Then in June of 2019, Karp filed a special permit with Inland's Wetlands. He asked for permission to disturb an additional 10,000 square feet of wetlands. That is in the permit application attached to my affidavit as number 26. In addition, in April of 19, 2.5 months earlier than filing for the special permit with Inland's Wetlands, Mr. Karp files with P&Z. Now in his P&Z application, it's not 10,000 square feet, it's 15,095 square feet of wetlands that he intends to disturb by the 2019 modification and special permit application filed with P&Z. The Inland's Wetlands Commission does not have the application to P&Z in its file. I've reviewed everything for over 11 hours. I listened to every hearing, and Mr. Karp misrepresented to Inland's Wetlands that they were going to disturb 10,000, when in fact they gave specific calculations to P&Z of 15,095 square feet additional. And that's exhibit 28 to my affidavit. So what's interesting is when Mr. Karp's office sent out the notices to the public of the hearing on the special permit application and P&Z application, he attached both the inland wetland special permit and the P&Z special permit to the notice that conflicted each other in terms of the square footage. And the cover letter said they intended to disturb 15, in excess of 15,000 square feet. But yet the application, the special permit application he filed for wetlands 2 months later only said they were disturbing 10,000 square feet. So then in August.
Mr. Durkin, let me ask you a question. How much more time do you need?
I would need probably a half hour or so.
You got a half hour worth? Okay.
Yes.
Can you kind of shorten it a little bit?
I will do my best to move it along as fast as I can for you.
Thank you.
In August of 2021, Mr. Karp filed an inland wetland permit modification to 17-18-53, claiming he needed to dig 4 to 5 feet deeper into the wetlands because he encountered unsuitable materials. Well, when he did that, he provided no calculations as to the amount of square footage he had to disturb. He provided no maps to the Inland Wetlands Commission as to the location of the additional areas of disturbances. He provided no calculations from his engineers, soil scientists, landscape architects relative to the amount that he had to disturb. And also, he had done the work first before filing for the permit. He got caught once again doing work in the wetlands without a permit. Kathleen Holland forced him to file a retroactive permit. He did so on August 31st and without the necessary information to determine the extent of the square footage being disturbed. Ms. Holland granted the permit 3 days later without requiring any backup or substantiation for the square footage that would be disturbed. So you can see that he went from 930 to 750 first, then from 750 to 450 with 2 foot, without the 2 foot buffers. Then he went from 750 square feet to 2,036. Then he went from 2,036 to 12,036 in the inland wetland special permit. Then he went from 12,036 square feet to 17,036 square feet in the P&Z application. And now he's gone from 17,036 square feet to an undetermined square footage over and above the 17,036 because he's digging 4 to 5 feet deeper without indicating where and how much he's digging. So based upon all of this information regarding his misrepresentations regarding his intended use and development of the property and the extent of the actual areas of disturbance, those were all calculated, misinformation, deception provided to the commission in order to get his permit 17-18-53. As a result, we ask, based upon that ground, those 2 grounds, that the permit be revoked permanently and the driveway be removed, the property restored to its then 2014 condition. Alternatively, we ask the commission to suspend his permit pending a decision by the Army Corps of Engineers, which is still pending and which he has not yet filed for a permit, as he was advised to do in the notice of violation in March and as he was told to do in the April 27th letter from the Army Corps of Engineers. The third ground for revoking his permit is the fact that he has not filed, never filed for an Army Corps of Engineer permit as required. The Hill Street property is located within the 5 Mile River watershed. Mr. Karp's professionals knew as early as 2014 that the Hill Street property was part of the 5 Mile River watershed. Exhibit 31 is a McCord Engineering Company storm water management report dated January 6th of 2014. In the introduction, in the second sentence on page 1 of the report, he notes for the commission that this property is in the 5 Mile River watershed. There is a 5 Mile River watershed based plan that was prepared and adopted in 2012. Kathleen Holland was a contributor to that plan and is acknowledged in the plan as a key contributor. Mr. Karp has stated to Ms. Rose on the May 24th site visit that no one from the town ever advised him that he needed an Army Corps of Engineer permit. That statement, in my opinion, does not hold any credence whatsoever. First of all, his engineering firm knew it was in the 5 Mile River watershed. The 5 Mile River watershed plan bestows jurisdiction, concurrent jurisdiction on the Army Corps of Engineers, the DEP, and Inland Wetlands of New Canaan. Each agency he must apply to for permits to conduct any activity in regulated areas. So his own engineer knew, and if they didn't, well, then they should have known, and they didn't do the job they were getting paid for. Kate Throckmorton also knew, because the identification that this property is in the 5 Mile River watershed is also identified in her reports. So, and Mr. Karp had a soil scientist, and Mr. Karp had an attorney advising him. So for him to make a claim to anybody that he did not know a permit was required because his property was in the 5 Mile River watershed means that all of his professionals failed to do their jobs, or worse, were incompetent when it came to the permit requirements with the Army Corps of Engineers. Based upon the fact that he needs to have a permit, based upon the fact that the Army Corps has issued a notice of violation and cease and desist order in March, and based upon the fact that the Army Corps has advised him not in a letter of April 2022, not to do any further work, and that he needed a permit, and that as of today, he still hasn't filed for it, I request that his permit be revoked for failing to comply with the requirements of the Army Corps of Engineers. What's most troubling to me about his failure to get a permit is I listened to every single public hearing tape going back to 2014. I reviewed the entirety of the Inland Wetlands Commission file going back to 2014. And nowhere in those hearings or that file is there any reference to the Army Corps of Engineers or to a potential permit application. He tried to claim to the Army Corps he didn't know about the permit. That to me is preposterous. And it sounds like the same claim he's made here with regard to needing a permit to dig 5 test pits in uplands regulated areas on the property and to stockpile materials for over 3 months with no permit in upgrade lands in and around wetlands. I've advised Ms. Holland that Mr. Karp on the May 24th site visit with the Army Corps is throwing the Inland Wetlands Commission under a bus and saying that no one from there told him about that. I've asked her to confirm the accuracy or inaccuracy. To date, she's refused to address that. The final issue that we ask the permit be revoked or suspended is the fact that we have Mr. Karp trucking materials of unknown origin and content from an illegal dump and quarry site in Monroe and dumping them on the property. I'd like to show you a brief video that follows the truck from Monroe down to Hill Street and shows the truck dumping.
August 16th. We're driving down Pepper Street. Alrighty, we're still following the same truck, August 16th.
Doesn't have tail plates or license plates or any markers. But I'm following him. So here he goes. All right, still following the truck. He's 2 vehicles ahead. We're heading towards on the 95 south. It's 1:40 in the afternoon. August 16th. There he is again, right in front of us. All righty. August 16th. Still following the same truck. Heading south on I-95. Let's see where he goes. It's a Summit truck. Yes, we are getting off at New Canaan. The same truck. Let's see, same. Here we go. Same truck. You can kind of see a license plate. It looks like 8729-A. We're taking a right. We're in New Canaan. Alrighty, we're on Hill Street. The truck is backing and dumping right here on Hill Street.
It's significant to note that at the time he dumped these, Peter Metropolis has an affidavit. It's attached to our petition as Exhibit F. He is the contiguous neighbor on the Monroe site in Monroe. And between August and September 2021, he personally followed and taped 9 truckloads of fill material coming from the dump site in Monroe and being dumped in the driveway in the wetlands in Hill Street. At the time of all of these dumpings of materials of unknown origin and content, Mr. Karp was under a notice of violation issued by the town of Monroe on November 13th, 2019 for violating an inland wetlands permit, exceeding areas of disturbance, destruction of vernal pools, and required wetlands permits not being obtained. Also, at the time of dumpings, he violated a cease and desist order of the town issued on June 24th of 2020 for operating a quarry without a permit, importing and exporting earth and building materials and fill materials of unknown origin and content. At the time he made the dumpings, he violated a citation of zoning violation dated July 30th, 2020, issued by the town of Monroe. In addition, he violated a second cease and desist order issued by the town of Monroe on September 16th, 2021 for operating without a permit and non-permitted import and on-site deposit of fill materials of unknown content and origin. If you would like to see the condition of the dump site, there are photographs attached to Mr. Metropolis's affidavit as exhibits F and G. Once again, without test pits or soil analysis of all of the materials he brought from the illegal dump site and the illegal quarry in Monroe, no expert here, either his expert, our experts, or this commission can determine whether or not the materials he imported from Monroe are clean, non-porous materials and appropriate for use as fill materials in the wetlands. Permit needs to be revoked or suspended. Mr. Karp needs to do test pits and soil analysis to prove to the commission that the materials were appropriately brought from that test site. The only other issue in the petition that we've already discussed is the removal of DeAndrea Surveying Engineer as the site monitor on behalf of the town. As we indicated, there's a severe conflict of interest, and they are the ones being paid to issue the plans for the affordable housing complex on Hill Street and on Weed Street as well. So to ask someone who's being paid substantial monies to, in essence, turn Mr. Karp in when he doesn't comply with the conditions of his permits is absurd, with all due respect.
All right.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Durkin. Attorney Smith, do you have can you spend a few minutes, not a lot of time, answering this?
Sure, sure. I'm just checking one comment that I'm receiving here. What I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, is at the outset, I would like to point out that this matter, item 12 on the agenda, involves a request to rescind a wetlands permit. And I would just like to point out that that's a very serious request. I don't see these very often. And in particular, your 2018 wetlands permit that you approved, that I think folks have found that all the work that's occurred out there is consistent with, is a vested property right that runs with the land, which is owned by my client. I would like to remind the commission, with a lot of what we heard does not involve regulated activities. And I think the commission fully understands that your job, your jurisdiction concerns reviewing and, if appropriate, approving regulated activities, sometimes with a substantial amount of conditions, which you did in 2018 relative to this driveway crossing. It's not the commission's job to regulate uses in upland areas relative to an access driveway, nor is it to look into, as the chair indicated at the beginning, the commencement of this meeting, the intent of a property owner. And I believe in 2018, there might have even been a moratorium in effect with multifamily housing or 830G housing. There was an 830G moratorium, I believe. I find it a little disconcerting that I don't hear multifamily development. I keep hearing affordable housing development. That seems to be the issue with some people. Again, the use of land in the upland review area, whether it's a pharmacy, a commercial development, a multifamily development, 2 homes or 25 homes, is really not for this commission. This commission, when you looked at the crossing, you were looking at the regulated activities associated with it. If my client goes to do anything else with the property that involves creating new regulated activities, my client has to come back to this commission for approval of those regulated activities. Absolutely no doubt about that. As to intent of a potential use of property for a driveway crossing that was approved in 2014, 8 years ago, I would respectfully submit that that's an improper basis that's being submitted by the petitioners as a basis for revoking a permit that was approved and to this day has been complied with. I would like to point out that, I'm going to have a couple of questions again for my experts, Mr. Chairman, that much of what we heard from Mr. Trinkus, with all due respect, and quite a bit of what we heard from Mr. Durkin concerns revisiting the application processes that occurred with this commission concerning your approval and modifications of permits associated with this driveway crossing. One of the things we heard, we keep, whether a certain standard in the 2004 stormwater guidelines for deep have been complied with. Well, those are issues. And another one, I think there was a reference to 15,000 square feet of filling. And I did receive, and it's my understanding that 15,000 square feet of filling was fill associated with the development. There's never been 15,000 square feet of filling in the wetlands. It's under 5, which is why my client, being under 5, didn't think he needed an Army Corps permit at the time when he did obtain that approval. So I think what we're hearing is an effort from the petitioners to revisit and address the issues that they tried to raise with this commission as interveners under 22A19 in 2018. And what I would like to point out that in 2018, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, as conditions of approval, and I'm referring to the inland wetlands permit number 17-18-53, is recorded on the land records of the town of New Canaan in book, it looks like, bear with me, 994 at page 431. If I didn't get that correct, I apologize, but a copy of it is, I believe, in your packet. You do have a copy of it. One of the conditions that the commission imposed as a condition of approval, and I think this might have been at the recommendation of the interveners. I wasn't involved in this matter until March 17th of this year, when I first had my first conversation with folks concerning this matter. But the commission required there to be an arch culvert instead of the initial proposed box culvert. The commission also found, these are findings that the commission made that you are being asked to revisit concerning Kate Throckmorton's landscaping plan provided steps to mitigate, quote, some of the wetland disturbance, specifically with 5,000 square feet of mitigation plantings, 780 square feet of wetlands creation, 1,470 square feet of wetland enhancements, and 3,600 square feet of buffer zone enhancement. Additional, a very robust planning mitigation plan. The commission also found, as finding number 8 in your 2018 approval, the quote, the commission acknowledges the fire marshal's preference for a 16-foot wide driveway proposed by the application to allow access for emergency and larger vehicles, end of quote. And then you also made a finding that the application proposes, quote, a 25% reduction in impact to wetlands compared to the activity authorized, approved by this commission pursuant to the existing from the 2014 permit, end of quote. So quite a bit happened when you reviewed this and approved this driveway crossing in 2018. And I think much of what we're hearing from the petitioners concerning the specifics with regard to the application concerning issues that presumably they raised in 2018. And quite frankly, with all due respect, the train left the station. You rendered a decision. So 2018 permit, nobody took an appeal. That's a final decision. It's a vested permit. And I think that the testimony we heard from the other matter, along with this one, with the reports from Mr. Mr. Kenny, as well as Mr. Duenas, is that the construction to date has been consistent and is consistent with this commission's approval in 2018. I respectfully submit my last 2 points, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I did not hear anybody identify and quantify any adverse impact associated with the conditions of that property and the driveway as constructed today pursuant to your 2018 permit. Just not there. The evidence in the record from Mr. Kenny in his report of May 12, 2022 is that there is no adverse impact that's out there. Nor will there be any adverse impact relative to the remediation, taking the material off site and restoring it. And as to the claims of unreasonable pollution, I didn't hear any expert testimony identifying and quantifying any adverse impact or the reasonable likelihood of having that somehow that site, whatever's happening out there today, is resulting in is creating a reasonable likelihood of unreasonable pollution, impairment, or destruction of a public trust in the air, water, or other natural resource of the state of Connecticut. And to that end, Mr. Chairman, well, one other comment before I do ask my experts those magical 2 questions, maybe 3 with the adverse impact, because this is a different proceeding, is that on May 10th, when we had the site visit, and I was there with the representative from Army Corps, Corey Rose, and a representative from Connecticut Deep, we were told by the Corps that there was no need to change what was there on the ground. In other words, that crossing, we could just leave it. We were told to work with Director Holland in this commission and going forward. We do have to apply for a permit with the Corps. We had a self-verification. It has to go to a pre-construction notice. And we were also told that reminded by the Corps, and I'm reminding the commission respectively, but Attorney Gelderman can speak to it, that the Corps' jurisdiction is really different than this commission's. It's concurrent, but it's different. It's like going to zoning and then you have to go and get an OSTA permit for traffic. It really has nothing to do with this commission. In fact, federal wetlands are defined differently than Connecticut wetlands for the most part. There's a distinction, as you may know, federal wetlands generally by plant type, and Connecticut wetland soils are by soil, or Connecticut wetlands by soil types. So there is even a distinction there. But again, we don't need a Corps permit to have our wetlands permit with this commission. And at the moment, it's my understanding we can continue. We just have to work with this commission relative to what's going on at the site today. It's separate and distinct from the Army Corps. And we were told with the Corps that there was no need for us to change anything on the ground relative to this crossing. And I would like to note on the day I was there that that stream, quote unquote, coming down off the hillside underneath the driveway was bone dry. I mean, it's clearly an intermittent water course. I had this vision of, a very large water course going under there. But more importantly, your director Holland is familiar with the site and has been there. representative from Deep has been there, and a representative from Army Corps has been there, and nobody has told us we can't continue going forward. And quite frankly, any of that is irrelevant to this request to this commission to revoke my client's wetlands permit that this commission approved in 2018. And I respectfully submit the evidence in the record establishes that driveway, as approved in 2018, those regulated activities have been complied with by my client to date. And with the permission of the chair, I would just like to ask, again, my two experts, a couple of quick questions relative to the intervention pleading that's been filed by the petitioners in this proceeding to present you with with expert testimony on the issues that have been raised.
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Joynes and Mr. Kenny, maybe I'll start with you first, Eric. Have you had an opportunity to review the petition to revoke, the intervention pleading, and the support material, and in particular, the material submitted by Mr. Trinkus and what you heard from Mr. Trinkus this evening?
This is Derek Donay from DeAndrea Surveying and Engineering, and yes, I have reviewed the materials.
And so I'm going to ask you two more questions, but basically the same. In your opinion, based on your knowledge of the subject property and the work completed to date, does any of the work that has occurred, or that will be done relative to removing the material from the site that's been requested of us by Director Holland and the commission, will any of that result, or has it resulted, or will it result in an adverse impact to a wetland or a watercourse?
It has not resulted in any adverse impacts to the wetlands or watercourses, and it is unlikely that it will.
And in your opinion, in reviewing the same documentation and site conditions, in your opinion, does any of the activity that's occurred to date or is proposed relative to removing that material that's located on the property have the reasonable likelihood of resulting in the unreasonable pollution, impairment, or destruction of the air, water, in particular, any on-site or off-site wetland or watercourse or other natural resource of the state of Connecticut?
No, I do not believe that any of the work that has happened so far within the wetlands area would have any adverse impacts to any of those resources.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Kenny, do you want to respond? Do you want me to go through each one of those, or do you? I'll ask you the three questions, Bill. Mr. Kenny, did you review the petition to revoke the intervention under 22A19 and the support material, in particular the material submitted by Mr. Trinkus and the petitioners, including their testimony this evening?
Yes, I have. This is Bill Kenny.
And in your opinion, based on your knowledge of the subject property, including the wetlands and the work completed to date, does any of the work that has occurred or that is required to be completed as provided by the existing wetlands permit result in an adverse impact to a wetland or watercourse?
No, it doesn't.
And will any of that work or conduct have the reasonable likelihood of resulting in the unreasonable pollution, impairment, or destruction of the air, water, in particular, any off-site and on-site wetland or watercourse or other natural resource of the state?
No, it won't.
Okay, thank you very much. And as to the, just two quick comments, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, as to the fill material, as we represented before, I believe that the Monroe site has nothing to do with this site. It is being monitored by a licensed environmental professional. And my client has worked with the town of Monroe after purchasing that property. There are no issues there. And relative to having to go out and hire a third-party consultant to just observe my client remove the small amount of material that's on the property and to seed it and restore that area, when your director of wetlands, Director Holland, can certainly do that, is only, I respectfully submit, is only going to create delay in trying to hire somebody to that extent, and really isn't necessary for the small amount of material that will be removed. And again, all being removed, all that is placed outside and upland of any of the soil and erosion controls, and will simply be trucked right out the driveway, right out to the main street. It's a stone's throw. I might even be able to throw it from point A to point B. And that I respectfully submit that that's just really not necessary to protect either the commission or the wetlands in particular, which is why we're all here. And it's just being done for purposes of delay. And I would respectfully request on behalf of my client, Mr. Chairman, and members of the commission, that the petitioners have not sustained their burden of establishing a basis for revoking my client's existing wetlands permit that this commission approved back in 2018 after 2 nights of hearing and listening to some of the same folks present you with possibly, I don't know, I wasn't there, a similar testimony concerning the merits of that application. It was approved, and I think that the evidence in the record establishes that to date, the driveway has been constructed in compliance with your approval. And I would, and again, respectfully submit that relative to the 22A19 petition, that the petitioners have failed to demonstrate that the conduct to date or any future conduct under the permit that you've already approved and they did not appeal is reasonably likely to result in the unreasonable pollution or impairment or destruction of the air, water, or other natural resource, and respectfully request that you make findings to that effect and effectively just find that the interveners failed to sustain their burden of proof.
All right.
Yeah, my client, we're here to respond to any questions, but that's our rebuttal, and thank you for the
Does
opportunity.
anyone on the commission have any questions for Mr. Durkin or Attorney Smith? Or I see Mr. Karp is in the audience. Possibly you might want to ask him a question. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question actually for both attorneys. It's for maybe probably for Attorney Gelderhorn, but maybe Attorney Smith too. I guess my question is, to the extent that the committee was given a report for our consideration in order to make an educated and informed decision when we did it in 2018. Specifically, I'm thinking of the McCord engineering report. To the extent that that plan basically provided us with information, and it was the conclusions were all for the proposed development, and the proposed development there was indicated to be 2 single-family homes. To the extent that we relied on that, does that affect how our decision in this should be made? And I guess Attorney Gelderhorn, that's probably for you.
Well, yeah, that's what you have to decide. That's the issue that's in front of the commission. Because if
so, it is a board. It's not just one person. Get out from under
I'm having a hard time.
Having a hard time because my mute button was on. The answer is yes. I mean, that's the commission's, that's what this matter is in front of the commission to decide. So the commission has heard from both sides, and now it's the commission's job to make a determination, probably not tonight, but because I think you've got a lot of stuff to consider, but now it's in the commission's, the ball is in the commission's court to make a determination. And if the commission determines that there was a material misrepresentation, and by material, that means effectively that it mattered in making your decision. Your decision may have been different if something else was provided to you. If you find there was a material misrepresentation, and that has to be with knowledge. Remember, fraud involves intent and reliance. Those are the 2 elements really of a fraudulent claim, that you have to prove intent, you have to prove reliance. And that's what's before you. That's what you have to decide.
George?
Yes, I think I'm going to direct this to Kathleen. Kathleen, would there be any appreciable difference in the impact of a multi-dwelling house as opposed to 2 individual houses on the wetlands? In other words, is it the same for both if we're looking at it, or is the size going to indicate which way we should think about this?
I honestly am unable to answer that question, as is the commission, because I'd only be speculating on the specifics of an application that we do not have. We do not
Right.
have anything in that regard that has been filed in the 7+ years regarding the balance of the property. So unfortunately, George, I'm not trying to cut around you. I'm just not able to answer that question without an actual full application coming forward at some point in time. If that's what the intent of the project is, we would take that under consideration.
My question is more though, even without getting another application, if we relied on a report and that report was based on the representation by the reporting company, McCord Engineers, that we were dealing with 2 single-family homes, and their conclusions were based on their evaluation of the impact to the wetlands by 2 single-family homes. Does it matter then if the new application or a new application is filed or not? And I guess I'm asking legally, I'm just trying to figure out, and maybe you answered it sufficiently, Attorney Gelderhorn. I have to think about this, I guess.
May I address the question, please? Commissioner Kirby, your question hits the issue right on the head. First of all, with all due respect to Attorney Gelderman, this is not a fraud case. This is a deception and inaccurate information, which is the standard in the permit and in section 15.2.2. So the knowledge in scienter is not a legal element of those terms. All I have to prove is that the information provided in the context of you granting the application was deception, based on deception, or based on inaccurate information. So it's not the higher standard of fraud. So that's number one. Number two is that if you look at the report that Commissioner Kirby's relying or referencing, which is the McCord report, the Stormwater Management Report, that's attached to my petition as Exhibit 7, okay? When someone says that the intended development is irrelevant for purposes of determining the conditions imposed upon the driveway is mind-boggling. Looking at his report says the proposed site improvements consist of construction of a shared driveway to serve 2 single-family homes. He goes on to state the site is currently undeveloped. Quote, the intent of the subdivision is to construct 2 single-family homes with a shared driveway access from Hill Street. He also goes on to say that the proposed improvements will increase the amount of impervious area on the site and thus increase the amount of peak stormwater runoff generated during a storm event. Therefore, a stormwater management detention system is proposed, both to attenuate the increase in runoff and to pre-treat the runoff prior to draining in the 5-mile river basin. Part of that report, they then go on to make stormwater runoff calculations. And when they do that, they assume that there are 2 homes with 2,800 square foot roofs. They calculate the square footage of the driveway, the private driveway going to each home. They calculate the square footage of the grass area on each residential lot. They calculate the square footage of the pervious pavement and pervious materials and impervious materials on each lot. For anyone to say that in designing a common driveway to service two single-family residences, that the intended development is irrelevant is contradicted by the stormwater management report filed by the engineer McCord, because he had to determine whether the water coming from the roofs and through the gutters and the downspouts and the driveway and the front lawns and the pervious and impervious surfaces on those two would increase the runoff into to the wetlands. And as a result, he said it would, and therefore he recommended and designed a stormwater management system for these two single-family residences. So,
Okay, can I just go back for another comment? I guess I'm not suggesting any intent or any deception. I guess my question would be, if the commission in any case was given a report at any point in time in any homeowner or any particular developer, and we relied on a report, and it was by mistake, or it was a change in conditions, but we relied on that report nonetheless to make a decision on the permit, is that enough to revoke the permit? And again, I guess I'm asking you, Attorney Gelderman, what are do we have to prove, does intent have to be there?
Well,
Is it enough that you rely on a report and basically the conclusions made in the report are done from what is inaccurate information, I guess?
again, that's not really my call to make that determination.
I understand
It's
it's not
the
your call. I'm
it's the
asking what
commission's,
the law
but
is.
let me finish. Let me finish. To me, you're asking me, in my opinion, the question the commission should be asking themselves is if they knew what they know now, or based on the application that was presented to them in 2018, does that make a difference? Does the information that you were given make a difference? So is the crossing that was approved, the crossing was approved. So does that information make a difference? Is that critical to the decision of the commission to approve the permit? If it is, then the commission needs to think about what the recourse of that is. But keep in mind that only the crossing was permitted in 2018. And if there's any additional impact to stormwater or anything else that might impact the wetlands, the applicant has to come back to the commission if there's any change to the impact on the wetland, the water course, that's not consistent with the 2018 approval. They will have to come back to the commission for a review.
But if,
Mr. Chairman,
and I don't mean
I'm
to be
sorry.
putting you, if I can just follow up. And I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, but if we are relying on a report, even to just do the crossing, the road and the culvert, the bridge there, but we don't have information right now that tells us, well, the McCord report would be different with a different change in circumstances. How that kind of puts us between a rock and a hard place.
Mr. Chairman, if I can respond to Commissioner Kirby, who you did ask either Attorney Gelderman or myself
Yes, I
to
did.
respond
Yes, I
to
did.
a while ago.
Yes.
One of the points that Attorney Gelderman, your attorney, points out, and it's absolutely relevant, and it's what I had mentioned before, and I think it really needs to be clarified. What you approved in 2018, please look at the permit, was the crossing.
I don't dispute that, but we were given a report at that point in time. We were given a report, and presumably we were given it because we were supposed to consider it in our decision and make an educated and informed decision, and that was part of our educated and informed decision. I'm not saying rightly or wrongly, but that was part of our. And if that was based on their proposed development, then this is McCord, proposed development of 2 single-family homes, And that just conclusions they made might have been different if they were talking about a different situation like we have now. But we relied on that based on that, even for that particular, just this crossing. Is my question is, you know, how does a commission deal with that, I guess?
Well, it's a very good question. I would just.
As I said, it's not. I'm not even looking at intent. I'm just looking at if it occurred in any case that
Right.
you know we got a report and then you know we relied on it and then it was wrong.
That's what I was going to point out. I'm hoping that I'm not hearing that if this application had been filed in 2014 and it was for a multifamily development, and this commission said, as it did in 2014 and then again in 2018, that the only regulated activities that were in front of you concerning the driveway, access driveway, I'm hoping I'm not hearing that when this commission in 2014 and then again in 18 found no adverse impact and approved it, I'm hoping I'm not hearing you would have had a different conclusion if you thought it was a multifamily housing development instead of two families. But the two families, you didn't approve the two families, Commissioner Kirby. You approved the commission, not you, it may have been you, but the commission approved the crossing.
I'm not disputing that. I think maybe I'm not making myself clear. As part of that approval was based on information in a report. That information in a report was based on their analysis of two homes, two sites with proposed development was for two single-family homes, is what they said. So would their conclusions have been different, and therefore would our reliance on those conclusions be different?
You did not approve the development. You approved a regulated activity.
I'm not saying we approved the development. You're missing my point, or I'm not making myself clear. The question is, the information in that report pertained also to, it pertained to this particular question, the permit. That's why we were given it, because it pertained to the permit, and we were given that information. So my point is, if the facts or the conclusions from that were based on two single-family homes, would their conclusions as to the amount of water runoff and what would happen to the wetlands, would that have been different?
And again, that's not what was in front of you. That's not what you approved. What you approved, you reviewed and approved, was the driveway crossing. That's the regulated.
Based on facts given to us.
But if it's not a regulated activity, it's the regulated activity that you regulate. It's not the use in the upland review area. Whether it changes over time from 2014 when it was initially applied for as a two lots, excuse me, to now, that was whatever, 8 years ago. I just respectfully submit that a Wetlands Commission looks at regulated activities, and even if I'm sorry?
I'm not disputing that.
Even if you were to have looked in 2018 and that made it different somehow, in that scientifically the regulated activities were therefore acceptable where they would not have been otherwise if it was a multifamily, I respectfully submit that if you had done that, that would not have been an appropriate reason for denying that application. And again, that's not what was in front of the commission, and that's not what you approved. You approved the driveway crossing and the regulated activities associated with it. Please do not get confused with the blurring of that development and alleged misrepresentations. I just wanted to point that out.
I'm not even, as I said to you when I started this, I'm disregarding intent. I'm trying to find out when a report is based on certain facts and those facts are different. Does it affect the conclusions that they've made?
I think Commissioner Kirby's trying to point out that if there was a certain calculation given by the engineer for the situation, I think that the Wetlands Commission may have considered a runoff, a more impervious surface situation or calculations needed regarding the information that was given. I don't think that she's by any means saying, hey, you know, our outcome would have been different. I think that the calculations from Accord on the, you know, proposed site plan would have been different, right? And I think that's her point. I don't think it has anything to do with a proposed structure. I think it has to do with how much surface area was approved,
I
right?
think all you need to do
And
is look.
as
for
Attorney
Mr. Clark
Gelderman
to
pointed
reverse.
out, if that changes, my client would have to come back to you. And that's not what's before you this evening. What's before you this evening, you're being asked to revoke the permit for the crossing that's already is already 80% constructed, whatever the percentage would be. I'm just, that I understand what I'm hearing, you know, I understand that. And again, as Attorney Gelderman indicated, and we've heard from the beginning, that if my client goes to do any new regulated activity, changes any calculation that you were told with the prior one that you've approved, then we would have to come back to this commission. That's my only point, and that would not be a basis. There's nothing even in front of you to consider that's a change in that regard. And that, so therefore, I respectfully submit there's nothing in front of you that would form a basis for revoking a permit that my client conceivably could go out and build the 2 homes tomorrow if they wanted to. That's all. So,
Attorney Smith, I have a question for you. Does your client intend to come forward with a new application to the Inland Wetlands Commission based upon a change of plan in how that area is to be developed and the kind of calculations that you know there are about the stormwater runoff and other possible adverse impacts on the wetlands?
If my client does come forward with another application that involves regulated activities, yes, Commissioner Jameson, we would have to return to this commission.
That wasn't my question. That was not my question, Attorney Smith. My question is simply, or maybe your client wants to answer this for himself. Does your client intend to submit another application to the Inland Wetlands Commission?
I see that Mr. Karp is raising his hand, and I'll defer.
Yes, sir. Mr. Carr?
In the future, we may come back to the town with a different application than what was initially considered. In 2017, 2018, and I forget the other year, the town had a moratorium that would prevent any multifamily development. That moratorium is no longer in effect, and we are looking at our various options. As you saw from the fire hydrant plan that was shown as a change of intent, we have not yet decided what we're going to do. But to answer Commissioner Kirby's thing, the mathematics for the crossing have not changed, because when you looked at the crossing and all the plans that were submitted, it was for the crossing that was built. Nowhere in those engineering plans, and Derek helped me out at any point, by a prior engineer, was there any consideration for anything except the crossing?
Correct. This is Derek Donay from DeAndrea, and Commissioner Kirby, I think I can answer your question to help you out here. So the drainage report that was submitted in, I reviewed it from Accord Engineering back from the original subdivision. So that it's for a conceptual 2-lot subdivision. And what it basically entailed was 3 different parts to it. You had the crossing, and then you had the development of lot 1 and the development of lot 2. And the way he designed the systems for his conceptual plan, the crossing was a separate item, and then he designed a retention-detention system for lot 1 improvements, which would collect the runoff from the house and the driveway. And he designed another separate system for the lot 2 improvements, which collect the house and the driveway for that. So those are not part of the crossing that was permitted by the wetlands, the lot 1 and lot 2 improvements. But if you decide, so no matter what was built there, if it's 2 houses, the final size of those houses, like those systems have to be designed for those sizes. So the detention systems would be determined on the size of the improvements on that proposed lot. Those are outside of the wetlands permitted area. The crossing itself is more of a standalone item, and which was built in accordance to the plan. Does that help out at all?
Thank you.
If I may, Commissioner, the permit in and of itself puts the context of the decision granting the permit. And your permit 1718-53 specifically says under the detailed description of proposed activity that it's to install 16-foot wide driveway, under drain system and boulder slope stabilization to provide access to 2 proposed residences. And that language is repeated in the permit twice. So that puts the context in which the commission issued a decision granting the permit. Not only was the McCord Engineering, but multiple filings from McCord and multiple filings from Kate Thornmorton, the landscape architect, all of their filings put their calculations and their representations in context of a 2 single-family residences for these 2 lots. And there is a 2-lot subdivision, and that's what the application was. I would love to ask Mr. Karp, on May 24th, did he represent to the Army Corps of Engineers that he intended to build a apartment complex building in the back in the woods at the end of that driveway? Because I was there and he told it to my face personally. You're silent, Mr. Karp. I didn't hear your answer.
Mr. Durkin, you
thank
seem to have left out the attorney Durkin. You seem to have left out the first part. Part of the resistance is that this could be a multifamily or an affordable housing. You left out that this could. We have not yet made a decision. We have other applications pending in town, but you heard what you wanted to hear at that point. And if I can reference, you keep on going back to what you view as misleading data. The approval that was given was just for the wetlands crossing. The calculations are just for the wetlands crossing. And in 2017, 2018, 2019, and to 2020, the town had a moratorium. So no multifamily projects could be built on this site or any other site under almost any condition. That moratorium is no longer in effect, but we have not yet made a thorough decision about what we're going to do. You've painted me as not being truthful. When this commission granted me this approval, the approval is just for the wetlands crossing. You confuse some math because while you talk about 15,000 and 10,000, go back and look at it. It talks about the fill that is being put into the crossing. Not all of the crossing is in the wetlands. So your math is incorrect. The math, I believe, and we will double check this tomorrow, that was presented to the commission is accurate. The math that was presented to P&Z is accurate. It is different math because wetlands looks at wetlands and P&Z looks at total fill.
You represented that it was the total square footage of disturbance in the wetlands, whether it's fill or digging and removing, doesn't matter. That's what you represent in your applications.
That is actually incorrect.
So my final position on this is you have discretion. You have a inland wetlands regulation. You have a permit condition that allows the commission to revoke a permit if it was obtained through deception or inaccurate information. Intent is not part of either the permit condition or the inland wetlands regulation. Here we have presented to you substantial evidence.
Attorney Durkin, this has nothing to do with deception. It has to do with what was allowed at that time and what our wetlands crossing was approved for, okay?
So the representation.
Try to mix apples and oranges, but you're inaccurate.
Interrupted me and I didn't interrupt you. So the representations you need to look at are all of those by Mr. Karp when he got up in front of you in 2018. And if you look at his statements in October of 2018, he told you that 3 or 4 car trips a day is wholly different in a whole different ballpark than 130 car trips a day generated from an apartment complex. It doesn't matter whether it's affordable housing or not. It's putting a 101 unit apartment complex in a wetlands area with small homes and overbuilding an area and a residence that has no business with that kind of destructive development. So,
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Karp has responded to the question and relative to what land uses were even permitted. And it actually was an 830G, my understanding. It was an 830G moratorium. To the drainage study, I would just respectfully refer the commission to page 4 of your report, halfway down in the third whereas clause. The report that's referenced there is entitled, quote, Common Driveway Drainage Summary to Inland Wetlands Commission from Holt McCord Engineering Associates, dated October 9, 2018. And our only point is, again, my only point is, in ours is what was approved in 2018 was indeed a driveway crossing. It wasn't any potential, it wasn't any specific upland development at that point in time. And as I think the chair indicated in his initial comments, the intent of someone to develop their property once they have an approved crossing, let's say that it's 20 acres back and I get approval for a crossing. And I saw this on my wetlands commission in my old town. I served on for 16 years. It was somebody came in, they got approval, and then there was 30 or 40 acres, whatever it was rather extensive. And we became concerned with what might be developed back there ultimately. But they had and there was some concern with multifamily housing at one time or another there. But ultimately, they built what they built many years later, but they had the crossing, and our jurisdiction as a wetlands commission at that time was limited to the crossing. But more importantly here, my client couldn't even build a multifamily, couldn't use 830G relative to the town's moratorium that was in effect at that point. It would have had to come in with a traditional text amendment for any type of development that would exceed whatever was required under the zoning regulations. And again, I respectfully submit that my client one there's an attempt to taint him relative to misleading the commission just for the misleading purposes. And then second, to try to tie that as a basis for revoking a permit that involves a driveway crossing that's already been mostly installed. And there's no basis for that relative to alleged intent to build ultimately in an upland review area, where if there are any regulated activities associated with any future development on the balance of the property, my client has to come back to this commission seeking approval for those regulated activities. It's plain and simple. And if
Let me
indeed the
make sure
drainage,
I understand. Mr.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Attorney
I'm
Smith,
through.
I want
Thank
to
you.
make sure I understand that. Are you saying that if Mr. Karp decides to put a multi-unit building or buildings on top of that hill, that you may not come back to us with that? With that?
I'm not a wetland scientist, Mr. Kenny is, but the question will be, are there regulated activities associated with whatever is proposed for the balance of the property? And if there are, then we have to come back to the commission for approval of those regulated activities.
That's true. Okay. We'd have to get experts and all that involved in the whole thing, but we would certainly want to know if you've changed your mind from two houses to a 50 or 75 unit building up there. We would certainly want to know. That's all I can say. Yeah. George?
Yes, this is George Perkins. My question is, since there was a moratorium on building multi-unit houses, was your intent to build two houses, and is that your business model, or is your business model multi-dwelling houses? In other words, you applied for a permit to build a bridge, conceivably to two houses. If your intent was to build two houses, that's one thing. But if your intent was to get a permit to build a bridge and then later build a multi-complex, that's a little different.
And I think as my client indicated, he appeared before you in 2017, 2018, seeking to increase the driveway width to accommodate those two houses that had the two houses that were in the back at that point in time. And again, there was a moratorium in effect And similar to the prior application that we saw relative to that driveway for that single family home, that's what was on the table at that point in time. And since that time, which quite frankly was what, 3.5 years ago, there's the moratorium is no longer in effect, and my client is just looking at other options for the property based on that. But again, it wasn't, there's intent. I don't really think is an issue for the Wetlands Commission, although the interveners seem to be trying to make it one. And the only issue before the Wetlands Commission in 2018, and quite frankly today, or with any future application, is what regulated activities are associated with whatever's in front of you, because that's what you regulate. What somebody wants to do with those regulated activities. Your issue is there going to be an adverse impact to a wetland or watercourse? And 22.841 statutory factors for consideration. That's your job. That's what you've been delegated by the state Connecticut General Assembly. It's not to review potential adverse impacts relative to what the applicant may want to do with their property 5 years, or in this case, 8 years after the initial approval in 2014. I respectfully submit that that's really not where you should be going, and you're not authorized to go. The interveners are trying to get you to go there. There's nothing wrong with you even thinking these thoughts. That's what's being presented to you. And I just respectfully submit that it's not appropriate for Wetlands Commission. The issue before Wetlands Commission with any application is what are the regulated activities? As far as any zoning issues, that's up for the zoning commission down the road. But your responsibility, you're the guardians of protecting the wetlands in the town of New Canaan and the wetlands and watercourses relative to this site. And again, you've approved the crossing. You've heard that to date, the activities that have occurred there are consistent with your approval. And if my client wants to do anything, would like to do anything else with his property down the road or their property down the road, and if they involve regulated activities, we have to come back to this commission.
But answer, Mr. Perk.
Why did he tell Kathleen Holland in August of 2014 he intended to put an affordable housing apartment complex there? The question is, why in August and September of 2015 did he look Dave DePanny in the eye and tell him he was going to build an affordable housing complex no matter what on that property? So you can't have it both ways. You can't say we only represented two houses, and yet there's evidence out there from 3 people that in 2014 and 2015, Mr. Karp represented to Inland's Wetlands, Kathleen Holland, and to Dave DePanny that he intended and always intended to put a apartment complex on that property.
And Attorney Durkin, what you are just ignoring, I thought you were done. What you're ignoring altogether is a Wetlands Commission in our state regulates regulated activities, not the intent or potential development of a piece of property. In this case, if there's a crossing, which is very, this happens quite a bit in our state along major roads where you have culverts that have been there forever, and you have wetlands crossings just to get to the rear part of the property. The question for the Wetlands Commission is, when you try to get to the rear portion of your property to develop it, are you creating adverse impacts to a wetland or watercourse? Because if you are, and there's no feasible and prudent alternative, then we have the ability under 22.841 to say no to that crossing. We're not looking at what you're going to do in the back. In fact, you don't even have to come in with anything in the back. All you have to do is have a crossing. Somebody can, there's nothing that says that I see those quite a bit. That's the law in our state. And it's not the commission's job to look at the intent of a landowner when they come in with an application seeking approval for regulated activities, and those regulated activities and whether they involve an adverse impact to a wetland or watercourse. So I just think that I just want to make it clear, and I think I have to the commission. I think that's a huge distinction as a matter of law in our state. And you're being asked to go beyond that, look at the intent of the landowner. And I don't think that's certainly not a basis for somebody going, I can't even imagine the precedent in our state when somebody changes their mind and when they want to do something and they go back and the neighbors go to a Wetlands Commission, or the Wetlands Commission says, Mr. Chairman, you don't have that crossing anymore because you've changed your mind. You've gone from 2 lots to 4 lots. And that's not what we approved. And it's like, well, you don't approve lots. You approve the regulated activities with the crossing. You have nothing to do with the lots. If the lots don't generate any regulated activity, you're not looking at them. If you had a 20 lot subdivision, 2 of them to build might involve regulated activities. you can't regulate the other 18. That's just not the way it works. You're being asked to look at the intent of my client today and what he may want to do with his property, and then go back in time and revoke a permit that initially was approved, let's think about it, in 2014. And I just respectfully submit that that's just wrong. And you're being asked by the interveners to do something, one, that you can't do, and two, I think it's just invalid as a matter of law. Thank you.
Attorney Smith, you're ignoring the history of the representations made in every single application for a driveway permit or a driveway modification from 2014 through the current as to the intended use of the property. In addition, you're ignoring permit condition number 14, and you're ignoring the inland wetlands regulation, section 15.2.2, and you're confusing a standard that doesn't apply to those and trying to engraft it here. I thank the commission very much. Unless there's any questions, I have no further comments, and we leave it in your hands.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Durkin. Any other, go ahead, Mr. Carp.
Just for the record, the original approval was not given to us. It was given to a prior property owner. The second revision, or really the first revision, but the second time I was in front of wetlands, we actually created less wetlands disturbance, Commissioner Perkins, because there was a bump out on the original plan that we figured out that we could get rid of, which created more wetlands disturbance. But, if the town had a moratorium, it would be potentially a 2-lot subdivision. Again, we have not decided. We have other applications in, but we're looking at a few different options for this piece, but nothing has been decided. And the part that Attorney Durkin didn't quite include was when I ran into one of the neighbors and he said he would stop whatever I wanted to build on that property. I said, as every builder says when they have water and sewer, well, it could always be affordable housing. Okay, so again, taken out of context, but yes, that has been something that has been discussed from the day that property got approved, because any piece of property in New Canaan that has water and sewer, okay, without a moratorium or without a plan for the town, has the potential to be a multi-unit development. We're working on plans. We haven't yet made a decision. But the painting of me being disingenuous, no, this has been 8 years in the making, 6 of which has really been us. And when we have a plan, the bottom line is we will almost without a doubt have to come back to this commission for whatever we do there.
Good, good. That's good. Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Carp. I understand. And if there is I understand your position, and I think you explained it very well. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Anybody else? I guess anybody else have any questions? We got more of a meeting. We about 4 or 5 things we still need to discuss. So if we're done with this, thank you, everyone. Mr. Carp, Attorney Smith, Mr. Durkin, whoever, Mr. Gilderman, thank you. We should, we'll talk, Kathleen and I, and you and Ira, we'll talk probably tomorrow and discuss what comes next. But right now, and then we'll make a decision.
Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. So everybody from the commission stay on, everybody else check out.
Dan, do you want me to continue with the agent report and the administrative actions?
Yes, I do. Yep.
So items 13 through 16 were administrative wetland applications that were filed with the office and reviewed, and these permits have been issued. If you want to take a minute and see if there's anything that you'd like to ask a question on, I'm happy to try to answer it for you. Does anyone have any questions?
No, I don't. Anybody else? No.
Okay. That would
Any
conclude.
other business anybody wants to?
No.
Nope. So can I enter a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
George will second it. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
everybody.
Thank you.